Good evening, dear listener. As you settle in for the night, imagine a quiet room warmed from below where smooth tiles hold a gentle heat and a small bronze tool rests on folded linen. Whenever you're ready to drift off, breathe slowly and let these soft, ordinary moments guide you towards sleep. Tonight, let's quietly explore for calm corners of the past. First, we'll spend a day beside warm stones and olive oil with a Roman bath attendant, learning how heat, steam, and simple tools cared for weary bodies. Then we'll close an Ottoman coffeehouse at night, stacking boards and dimming coals while the street grows still. After that, we'll step into a Song Dynasty ink workshop, where pine soot becomes fragrant ink sticks touched with quiet gold. Finally, we'll walk with a siren quartermaster who counts water, salt, and stars as a caravan moves by patient rhythm. There will be no hurry and no drama here, only careful work, soft sounds, and clear descriptions. The pacing will stay slow, the language simple, the tone steady and sleep safe. If your eyes grow heavy, let them. For now, rest your thoughts, ease your shoulders, and follow me into warm air and gentle light as we begin our first story. The day begins before the doors admit their first footsteps. In the blue-gray hour when streets still belong to sweeping, a bath attendant crosses a quiet courtyard with a ring of keys in one hand and a small loaf wrapped in cloth under the other arm. The tiles breathe a little coolness into his sandals. He pauses at the threshold, listens for mice in the storeroom, hears nothing but settled ash, and slips the first key into its familiar mouth. Inside, the baths hold yesterday's warmth like a memory. The air smells of chalk, olive oil, and faint smoke. Bronze lamps along the wall have been pinched dark, their wicks, now stiff, wait to be trimmed. The attendant sets his loaf on a shelf, opens the shutters one by one to let dawn become a pale companion, and walks to the furnace mouth, his first conversation of the day. Ash lies like soft snow along the iron grate. With a flat-nosed rake, he draws it forward into a clay pan. He keeps the motion light, as if combing hair. Beneath, embers glow in little coves, not quite dead, not yet useful. He lays fresh charcoal with a careful hand, building a low house for fire to live in. A twist of straw answers his breath. The first true flame licks its roof and stays. He closes the door most of the way so heat will travel through the hypocaust, hidden underfloor roads that carry warmth to Caldarium and Tepidarium. A gentle aside, the hypocaust prefers patience over passion. Quick heat is wasteful, even rude. He moves to the water room. A thin crust dried on the lip of a basin yields to his damp cloth. He listens to the cistern's quiet speech, then opens a tap to top up what time has sipped away. The stream is modest, steady, content to pour itself into usefulness without performance. In the frigidarium, cold water holds a clean smell. He lowers a ladle, tastes not for flavor, but for honesty, and nods. A folded reed mat receives his knees while he wipes the tile edges where feet hesitate. He works in small squares and finishes each before beginning another. The floor enjoys being completed many times. At the shelf of tools, bronze strigils hang from wooden pegs, curved like little moons. He runs a thumb along each blade's inside edge to feel for burrs. None offend. He polishes them with wool until they reflect the window in a polite, blurred way. Beside them, small amphorae of oil wait in the shade. He chooses one marked with a charcoal O for everyday use, and another with a faint R for rosemary, reserved for those with an extra coin and a stubborn shoulder. He sets both on a low brazier, not to cook them, but to soften the chill that clings to vessels at dawn. All prefers to meet skin at the temperature of good manners. Linen towels coarse, honest, easily laundered, dressed in a wicker basket. He shakes each one open and folds it in thirds, then again edges aligned. The rhythm settles his breathing. Folds make a small book of fabric, and each book tells a simple story, used, washed, dried in sun. Return to duty. He stacks them on a cedar shelf that sweetens the quiet. By the furnace, the grate has learned its lesson and glows deeper. He adjusts the iron vents with a hook, easing a little more air to the fire's appetite. In the caldarium, he kneels to press his palm against the floor. Warmth greets him from under the tile, not hot, not shy. It will be ready by the time the first patron arrives. A second aside. Heat that arrives early is admired. Heat that arrives late is forgiven once if it explains itself by weather. He lights two wall lamps, trims their wicks square, and reduces them to comfort rather than brightness. Yellow light makes bronze look generous. Steam from a small pot joins the room with the soft hiss of an old friend sitting down. He wraps the bread in his cloth back again, tears the heel, dips it in olive oil from a cup that keeps him company, and eats standing, eyes wandering along pipes, vents, and latches the way a shepherd checks a fence. From the doorway, a helper boy of perhaps 13 slips in like a respectful breeze. He bows with hands together and waits for instruction. The attendant hands him a bucket and a wicker scoop made from tight, neat corals. Frigidarian corners, he says, voice low as if not to wake the stone. The boy nods and goes, his sandals whispering. Training is not a speech here, it is a trail of tasks placed at good distances apart. The shells of small things receive attention next. Clay jars of pumice sit with their corks tied, Chuck rests in a basket lined with scraps of old linen, and a handful of sprigs bay, thyme hang upside down to dry. He crumbles a pinch of bay into the oil-marked R, rolls the amphor between his hands to speak the herb through the liquid, and sets it back. He writes a single tally mark on a wax tablet to note that one flavor has turned later. He will smooth the tablet with the flat of his thumb and rewrite it clean. A set of wooden sandals borrowed, for those who forget lean in a row. He checks the straps where leather hugs wood. One has softened too much. He tightens the thong and rubs a drop of oil into the knot to clear its throat. At the doorway, he hangs a length of clean linen to part the air, an invitation to quiet and a memory of heat that won't escape. He walks the route a patron will take. Entrance, locker niche, basin for hands, warm room, hot room, cold plunge, rest bench. At each stage he removes one obstacle, a stray reed, a drip that made an ambition to become a puddle, a towel leaning at the wrong angle. His hand meets surfaces the way a reader touches lines of a known poem, not to learn them, but to agree with them. Outside, traffic grows from single footsteps to pairs. A water seller hums a line. A mule pauses in the lane to examine its thoughts. The boy returns with his bucket and a cautious pride. The attendant inspects a corner the boy calls finished and finds it nearly so. Another cloth pass, he says, and the boy learns by doing that nearly does not mean done. In the warm room, the attendant prepares the first oiling place, a wooden bench with a lip at one end so a shoulder finds something to lean into. a shallow tray to catch any oil that would rather wander than work, and a small bowl of water warmed by being near the brazier, not on it. He folds a towel into a long ribbon to cushion a neck. A soft brush boar bristle cut short lies ready to loosen dust before oil meets skin. He listens again to the furnace, sliding the iron door just enough that flame answers with a low, contented voice. He tests the tepidarium's air with a long breath, and nods at his own lungs. The bath as a whole is an instrument. His job is tuning rather than performance. The first knock is a gentle one. A man whose labor clothes have known rope and salt steps in, eyes grateful for warmth, movements arranged by habit. He murmurs a greeting. The attendant returns it with a bow more like a nod, the language here being economy and care. He takes the man's cloak, shakes the last dust from its hem outside, and folds it where the sun will touch it later. A small tile is slid into place to mark the locker niches occupied. No names, just order. Hands, the attendant says, and the man holds them over the basin. Water pours not loud. The boy passes a cloth, the man dries, and the day's first clean thing happens, and is already behind them. The attendant warms a little oil in his palm. He rubs it once across his own forearm, both to soften the oil and to remind his skin of the work's measure. He gestures to the bench. The man lies on his side, head on the folded ribbon of linen, eyes closing by reflex as heat and smell make a small shudder. Oil meets shoulder, then arm, then long, even puffs. The strigil, cool and sure, follows, gathering oil, and the quiet grit of road and rope, wiping clean on a cloth at each pass. The rhythm does not hurry. It listens. It respects tired places by moving slightly slower over them. A gentle aside, in rooms like this, speech becomes thin and work takes up the shape of care without confessing to it. Tools stand in for kindness, and kindness chooses not to boast. When the man turns his back to the bench, the attendant checks the wick on the nearest lamp and trims a wisper of char. The flame steadies. A second lamp farther off is turned lower. The room asks for less light now that people plural, since the boy's presence counts are inside it. They work through shoulder and spine, forearm and palm, calf and heel. Where a knot speaks, he answers by pausing rather than pressing. Where skin complains, he widens the strigil's angle so it becomes almost a spoon. He rinses fingers in warm water, wipes them dry, and finishes by placing a folded towel across the man's back the way evening places itself across a field, lightly, fully, without fuss. The man thanks the room more than the attendant. The attendant understands this and prefers it. He gestures toward the tepidarium, where heat sits like a gentle companion, and the man goes, taking his slow breath with him. The boy looks to the attendant for the next small task. The attendant hands him the wool for polishing a strigil and points at the lamp that would enjoy a cleaner rim. Lessons continue. Beyond the shutters, the day is now plainly day. Inside, the baths are ready to receive their sequence of footsteps. The attendant straightens the towel stack once, not because it needs it, but because straightness is a kindness to the next pair of hands. He wipes a single droplet from the floor with a corner of cloth. The droplet leaves without arguing. Morning stretches itself into usefulness. Footsteps begin to arrive in a rhythm that soon knows itself. The first wave brings workers whose backs have carried baskets and whose palms remember rope. A baker comes in dusted with flour, white along his forearms like cuffs of light. He places a small coin on the shelf and nods toward the warm room. The attendant returns the nod, makes a quiet mark on the wax tablet, and slides a token tile along a rail to note an open place filled. Heat rises through tile and into air with the calm certainty of a practiced habit. The furnace door receives another handful of charcoal. The attendant keeps the draft just open enough that the flame's voice stays low. In the cauldron, steam gathers without hurrying, softening edges and making bronze gleam as if from within. The boy carries a basin from one room to the next, elbows close, step light. He has learned that water respects feet that remembered is heavy. At the oil shelf, the attendant tilts an amphora to refill the small ladle pot. The oil thickens when left to think about itself. He warms the cup briefly above the brazier until it becomes willing again. He scents a portion with bay for one patron whose shoulder resists rope. Another portion remains plain and honest. A gentle aside, in rooms that work, luxury is measured in attention rather than in spice. On the bench, the baker lies on his side, eyes shut, a smile that barely exists smoothing his cheek. The attendant brushes his back with short boar bristles to wake dust, then lays oil in long lines, following ribs and the grain of muscle. The strigil gathers oil and flour together into a soft memory that leaves on the cloth. At the hands, the attendant stops to admire the fleur's thin glove, then removes it with a thoughtful pass. The baker murmurs something about dough that rose too quickly at dawn. The attendant makes a sound that means he heard. Speech here is often shaped like water present, shaped by its container, not trying to be more. By the cold pool, two men step down until water covers their knees, and breathe as if a question has been asked and answered. The boy wipes each wet footprint from the tile edge before it can become a story. He sprinkles a pinch of chalk where splashes might turn to slickness. Chalk is not decoration. It is a small promise that feet will be believed. A mosaic worker arrives next, tesserae grit clinging to his hand. He carries a wrapped lunch, olives, a wedge of sheep's cheese, a few dates. He tucks it onto a shelf and loosens his belt. The attendant notes the fine dust on the man's hairline and chooses the plain oil first, saving the scented for after. The strigil's curve follows the spine and returns with a gray sheen that the cloth receives without pride. At the end, the attendant opens the amphora, now lightly perfumed with bay, and lays a single lane of it across the worker's shoulders. The man inhales once, eyes closed, and then steps away toward the tepidarium to soften further before the plunge. The lamps receive a trim. Wicks are squared, ash collars tapped away. Their flames accept the correction like good students. On a hook, the copper ladle waits. The attendant dips it in warm water and pours a thin thread along a tile seam that has asked for it by growing faintly pale. Water that travels in lines settles dust more kindly than water cast in handfuls. The furnace wants attention again. The attendant opens the iron door and rakes ash forward into the pan. The embers below are not scalded, they are offered better air. He lays new charcoal so it can meet heat without surprise. A side note, stoking is not feeding a hunger. It is arranging a conversation between air and ember. He closes the door to a width he could slide two knuckles into and listens until the flame song drops back into its proper key. The boy, having finished his circuit, stands with hands folded. The attendant passes him a bronze lamp with a sooty collar and a piece of wool, gentle, Many pauses, no scraping, he says. The boy polishes until bronze remembers it was once the color of sun-caught wheat. He returns it to its place with care that almost counts as affection. A matron arrives with a maid. Their steps fall softly, cloth whispering against itself. The maid carries a small jar sealed with wax. The attendant recognizes the look, a home scent, perhaps rose or myrtle. He warms a little oil in his palm, breaks the wax with his thumbnail, and stirs a breath of the jar's fragrance into the oil with the back of a spoon. These rooms are democratic in heat and water. They are personal in scent. The matron's shoulders receive oil with a slower rhythm. She is here for smoothness rather than hustle. The strigil's edge is light, its curve nearly flat, as if drawing the day off rather than scraping it away. The maid watches and learns how a towel folds to hold a neck at the correct angle. Learning here is not in words. It is in the angle of cloth and the willingness of the hands. By late morning, the baths have found their groove. People move room to room the way swallows arc from eave to air and back. No one announces the order, yet the order holds, warm, hotter, then cold, then rest. A young clerk enters with ink on his second finger. He carries his own towel, thin and frequently washed. The attendant regards the ink spot with professional curiosity. Oil greets it, strigil persuades, and a little pumice murmurs its soft abrasion until the dark lifts. The clerk laughs at the clean finger, then looks sorry for laughing, then laughs again quietly to himself, as if remembering a line from a letter that ended well. The boy collects used towels into a wicker basket and takes them to the yard where later they will be rinsed and sent to the fuller's. He does not stuff them. He lays them, as if bedding a small animal that prefers evenness. The attendant appreciates this without saying so. When the boy returns, he carries a ewer of clean water for the hand basin and pours with the high, thin stream that does not stir sediment from the bottom. Midday arrives and stretches. Light sharpens through the high windows, but inside the rooms it is turned gentle by steam and distance. The attendant takes his bread, now tucked soft in oiled cloth, and eats it with a few olives. He leans against the cool wall of the frigidarium, where the air's clarity can balance the furnace's constant persuasion. The boy sits on a step, bites a date once, twice, then offers the third to a fly that declines. They share a small smile that does not disturb the bath's privacy. A gentle aside, meals taken standing between tasks taste more of usefulness than of herbs. They satisfy a different hunger. Even as he eats, the attendant's hands work. He threads a fresh wick into a lamp, twists it between damp fingers to square its future edge, and sets it aside. He checks the leather hinge on a locker door and rubs fat into the place where it creaks. He lifts a strigil toward the window and studies its arc for tiny nicks, then kisses each away with a whetstone no longer than his thumb. He drops soiled cloths into a tub of water with a mouth of vinegar so tomorrow's cloths will not inherit today's stories. From the far room, the plunge gives its familiar sound, a tight breath in, a splash, a low chuckle of cold, and then the water, settling. The mosaic worker returns with hair smoothed into disciplined lines by wet hands. The baker waves on his way out, cloak over one shoulder, bread scent replaced by clean heat. The matron and her maid sit on a bench, sipping a little watered wine from travel cups they brought themselves. Every object seems to know its duty and be pleased by it. Afternoon brings a quieter stream of patrons. The city often slows then, Shutters partly drawn, speech thinner. The attendant adjusts the vents to hold the warmth rather than to climb it. He dims the lamps and raises one in a shadowed corner so no edge surprises a barefoot heel. On his wax tablet, he draws a line through a small list. Wicks trimmed, chalk at plunge, rosemary oil replenished, hinge fed, strigil edges kissed. Beside it, he adds, buy more pumice, and smooths the older note with his thumb until it becomes a soft gloss, ready for evening's new marks. For a while, the baths run almost on their own. The boy has learned when to be in the warm room and when to stand by the hand basin with a cloth folded lengthwise. The furnace is a content animal, breathing in through vents, breathing out through flues, warmth arriving where it is useful and declining where it would be waste. The cold pool stays honest. The attendant lifts a window shutter to finger widths to let a sliver of air cross the warm room at ceiling height. Air prefers to be invited. Drafts dislike being commanded. The lamplight balances with the steam until the room looks like a painting thought about but not yet finished. He wipes the top edge of the oil shelf with the back of his hand to grains of dust accept his hospitality and leave. Afternoon leans into the rooms with a softer elbow. Voices thin out. Heat settles into its middle distance. No longer eager, simply present. This is the hour when the bath breathes. And the attendant turns to tasks that prefer quiet. At the frigidarian, the cold pool waits with its familiar stillness. The surface shows the ceilings, arches like a steady thought. A new patron, an older man with a careful gait, rests on the first step and lets the water touch his ankles, then his shins. The attendant stands nearby, not hovering, only available, a towel folded lengthwise over one arm. The man closes his eyes as the first true chill climbs. He makes a small sound that is more greeting than complaint. Another step. Water takes his knees, then with an unhurried breath, he lowers himself the rest of the way until it falls into the chest. The pool replies with a quiet, roundlet sound. A gentle aside. The plunge is not a contest here, it is a punctuation mark. The sentence before it is warmth, the sentence after it is rest. The boy has learned to stand where the pool's edge offers a handhold. He watches for the small signs: a tightening mouth, a too still shoulder that mean a patron needs the cloth sooner rather than later. When the older man rises, the boy passes the towel to the attendant without words. The attendant wraps it around the man's shoulders the way evening wraps a hillside, and the man's sight carries gratitude in a low key. He sits on the bench near a high window where air moves modestly and rubs his arms with a simple, efficient pride at having met the water on fair terms. The attendant moves a finger along the pool's stone lip and finds a narrow stripe of limescale beginning to announce itself. He files it gently with a smooth river pebble he keeps for that purpose, not to strip the stone, only to bring it back to the idea of smoothness. He leaves a thin drift of powder and wipes it with a damp cloth that has thought about vinegar. The stone accepts the correction and returns to its earlier self. Repairs call from small corners. He answers them in a loop that always begins and ends at the furnace. The iron door gets a fingertip of fat along its hinge pin. The hinge swallows it like a secret and grows quiet. He checks the clay tiles that mantle the flue where it meets the wall. One shows a fine hairline. He taps it not sharply, just enough to ask, and the sound returns honest. He notes it on the wax tablet with a tiny cross, the way he marks things that can wait until week's end. At the oil shelf, He lifts each amphora an inch and sets it back to feel the weight. The rosemary oil feels lighter than his memory suggests. He loosens the stopper and peers in. Plenty for today, but he writes another mark on the tablet all the same. He runs a cloth under the lip of each jar, catching the ring of oil that wants to become Dusk's new home. Oil prefers to be in use, not in decoration. In the warm room, the wooden bench has learned people all morning. Its surface shows small arcs where the strigil's edge has passed. He lays a folded scrap of linen over the area and rubs a little beeswax into the wood with 2 fingers. Warmth from the room persuades the wax into the grain. A moment later the bench gleams the way a well-remembered line gleams when you say it softly to yourself. He fans the air with the linen so no one sits in tackiness. The boy arrives with a basket whose rim has loosened. A split willow strip has risen like a question. The attendant kneels, wets the strip with a thumb dipped in the basin so it will bend without complaint, and feeds it back to steady neighbors. He ties it off with a small tuck and taps the join with the handle of the strigil so it agrees to behave. He hands the basket back. The boy smiles a little too widely, then straightens his face as if remembering the dignity of places where water behaves. Another patron steps toward the cold pool, a teamster with a sun-struck neck and dust in his eyebrows. He moves with the certainty of someone who has met cold water often. He lowers himself to the second step, pauses, exhaled air feathering the surface, then goes in up to his collarbones. He rests his forearms on the edge and looks at nothing in particular. The attendant stands far enough away to leave the moment intact. When the teamster rises, the boy offers the towel and a single nod, as if to say that no one is watching and everyone understands anyway. On a shelf by the entrance, the attendant keeps a small wooden box of quiet tools, a bone needle for mending cloth, a spool of rough thread, a wedge of soft leather, a wet pebble, a roll of thin reed. He takes the bone needle now and squints at a towel's frayed corner. He makes 3 repairs that are almost invisible, tiny steps of thread that coax the cloth into lasting a handful more washings. The lad's eyes follow the needle as if tracing a map. Even stitches, the attendant says. Crowds of them. Crowds are stronger than heroes. The boy nods, pleased by the idea, even if he will forget the words and remember the hand instead. Steam from the caldarium drifts into the tepidarium's doorway like a generous neighbor with a bowl to share. The attendant sets a reed mat across the threshold to catch moisture before it thinks about traveling where it shouldn't. He presses its corners flat. The mat has served well and has grown thin in the middle. He rotates it so its shy edges have their turn in the center, the way farmers rotate fields. He notes new mat soon with a tiny circle on the tablet, his code for items that can wait for market day. Back at the furnace, he rakes the ash again, this time with longer strokes that persuade rather than demand. He sets the pan aside and, while the embers glow, takes a shallow sieve and sifts yesterday's cooled ash. The finest powder becomes a useful thing for scrubbing stubborn film from amphora necks. The heavier pieces go in a jar labeled with a scratched line. A gentle aside, in rooms of work, waste is simply a task that hasn't been introduced to its new purpose. The boy brings the lamp wool, a little too eager, and the attendant slows him by example. Short circles, light pressure, wick trimmed square without biting the cotton. They relate to lamps to the same level, then lower them together. The way to people carry a sleeping child careful, even grateful for weight that doesn't argue. The cold pool welcomes a pair of friends who talk in short phrases about weather, then say nothing at all while the water speaks their language. When they rise, the attendant wipes the step where they dripped, pushing water back to itself. He sprinkles a breath of chalk on the wet stone and smooths it thin, not to make a powder beach, only to give the next foot a whisper of grip. Safety here is seldom announced, it is arranged. He turns to the storage alcove. Shelves hold small things that make work simple: clay stoppers, spare lamp handles, wedges of cork, lengths of twine. He measures the twine around his hand and elbow twice, then cuts and ties it into a loop. The loop hangs on a peg where he can find it without thinking. He counts linen rolls enough for 3 days if tomorrow arrives politely. He shakes the basket that holds pumice chips. It answers with a half-empty sound. He chalks pumice on the tablet in letters he writes for himself alone. A woman from a nearby stall arrives with a jar of olive paste for trade, 2 small treatments in exchange for a spoonful, later for her own hands. The attendant accepts with a nod. The economy here is simple and neighborly. He sets the paste on the shelf beside the vinegar water with a small scrap of pottery that says gift in a single scratched mark. Gifts are not counted the same way as stock. The cold pool grows briefly lively when a pair of youths challenge each other to be brave for exactly 3 heartbeats longer than the other. The attendant allows it to happen once, then lets his silence expand. Their bravado remembers the room's rules and becomes laughter that respects its walls. They wrap themselves and go back to the warm room to brag more softly where steam can smooth the edges of their stories. Repairs continue in the quiet gaps. A cork trimmed so it no longer wobbles in a flask, a leather strap massaged with oil until it bends without complaint. A locker bolt persuaded with a touch of beeswax not to stick in the afternoon swell of wood. He rubs the stone threshold with a cloth, not to polish it, but to make it remember its own evenness. By late afternoon, the baths prepare themselves for the evening's second wind, when shopkeepers and scribes drift in after shutters fall. The attendant walks the rooms once more, a loop that now feels like drawing a circle around the day to keep it from scattering. He checks the cold pool's surface and skims away one leaf that rode in on someone's hair. He refills the hand basin until the stream sounds like a thin flute, then stops it as the note becomes full. He smooths the towel stack, edges aligned as if they were words in a line of neat script. He looks toward the doorway, where the city's light has shifted toward gold. The boy stands at his side with the basket mended and the lamps polished. They rest a moment without sitting, shoulders relaxing the way ropes do when a load is set down. Evening arrives by lowering its voice. The light outside turns the color of warm bread. Inside, the rooms keep their steady temper. Shutters are drawn in by degrees until the street becomes a thin idea. Lamps agree to shine a touch brighter, not to dazzle, only to take the sun's place with good manners. This is the hour of shopkeepers and scribes, of market women whose baskets are finally empty, of workers whose hands are inked rather than calloused. They come with polite fatigue and the faint dust of conversation. The attendant greets each with the same quiet nod, slides a token tile along the rail, and writes a modest mark on the wax. The boy has learned to anticipate the small needs of these hours: fresh cloth by the hand basin, chalk where the plunge will collect footmarks, a warm cup of oil waiting without being asked. A sandal maker enters first, leather scent carried in his hem like a pocket memory. He stretches his toes at the threshold, as if greeting Taya's kin. On the bench, oil travels along the cords of his feet, and the curve above the heel places that think about straps all day. The strigil follows with the patience of someone untying a knot without pulling. When the sandals are returned to his feet, he stands a breath taller, as if the floor has learned him anew. A scribe comes after, shoulders slightly rounded by scrolls. Ink stains his second and third fingers, the badge of his hours. The attendant warms a cloth in the tepidarium's soft air, lays it across the scribe's hands, and waits while heat persuades ink to remember it is not permanent. A hint of pumice or rinse, then a light tracing of oil, the stains step back. The scribe looks at his palms as if they've told a better story than the one he wrote, then goes to sit where the warm room thinks kindly of backs. Between patrons, the attendant tends to small equilibriums. He gives the furnace a last measured serving of charcoal, enough for evening, not so much that night inherits trouble. He closes one vent a finger's width. Warmth will wander more slowly now, like a guest who knows when to leave. A gentle aside, endings that feel natural are built a little at a time. The way twilight is composed of many tiny decisions by the light. Two friends arrive sharing a clay jug. They pour a finger of watered wine into travel cups and talk in the low key of people who agree more than they argue. They choose the order many prefer: day's end, warm, warmer, a brief cold, and then rest. The attendant follows their progress with the corner of his eye and with the barometer of the rooms themselves: steam's density, the tone of footsteps, the way lamps reflect in polished bronze. A father brings a child who is almost old enough to pretend fear of cold water, and brave enough to stop pretending. The boy a guest. Not the attendant's helper stands on the first step of the plunge and looks at the surface as if it has asked a riddle. The father murmurs remarks that are half encouragement, half theater. The child slides to the second step, then to the third, and finally sinks to his shoulders with the solemn expression of someone beginning a habit. The attendant does nothing grand. He is simply close enough to hand a towel at exactly the right time and to fold it around small shoulders so the warmth returns at the speed of kindness. The child meets the gesture with the serious dignity children lend to rituals, then smiles. The smile feels like a lamp turned a fraction higher. As the sequence of guests continues, the boy assistant moves like the quiet line in music that lets melody relax. He gathers used towels into the wicker basket, lays them flat, and takes them out to the yard where a rinse tub waits with clean water, a breath of vinegar, and a moon already thinking about climbing. He returns with a bundle of dry cloths that has been warmed by late light. The attendant stacks them with edges. True straightness is not ceremony here, but courtesy to the next tired body. A vendor of figs arrives with empty trays and a sugared smell on her sleeve. She sits, sighs once, and offers the attendant a small fig as if paying a toll to cross a river. He accepts and tucks it into the pocket of the day, next to a thought of later. Her shoulders receive oil with a slightly firmer hand, the strigil set at a wider angle to invite rather than insist. When she goes to the tepidarium, her steps sound less like work and more like someone remembering how to idle. Repairs at this hour are those that end the day properly. A last lamp wick squared, a cork seated so it doesn't think about loosening overnight. A locker latch cleaned of the grain of grit that only appears when rooms grow quiet. The attendant draws a damp cloth along the oil shelf's front edge, and the shelf answers with a dull glow. He lifts each amphora, notes their weight, and nudges stoppers well home. Or rests better when it knows it won't be disturbed until tomorrow. In the caldarium, steam has thinned from fog to breath. He lowers the lamp closest to the furnace mouth until it resembles a thought more than a light. In the tepidarium, he raises one lamp a whisper, so corners hold no surprises. The frigidarium requires almost nothing, a skin to collect a drifting petal, a slow sweep of water back to water, a fingertip check of the steps, stone for slipperiness. Chalk makes a light veil that vanishes under the next footfall, forgotten as soon as it helps. The evening gains its last cluster of arrivals, a seamstress with a threaded needle pinned in her hem, a carter whose fingers flex in a way that speaks of rains. A young couple who sit on a bench and exchange the kind of silence that does not need to be filled. The attendant gives each their due and no more, a measure that leaves everyone feeling precisely tended. When the seamstress leaves, she shows him her palms freed of dye, and he answers with the smallest tilt of the head that means work well done, both hers and his. Closing is not a door slammed, but a braid of motions. The attendant slides the entrance shutter to its near-night position and sets a single lamp in the vestibule for stragglers. He moves through the rooms in a gentle loop, oil shelf, lamps, benches, pool, furnace, hand basin, lockers, then back again. He adds an X beside 3 names on the wax the day's barters to settle tomorrow. Pumice from the stone seller, a new reed mat from the basket maker, lamp cotton from the woman whose fingers spin thread as easily as others spin stories. He and the boy carry the basket of used towels to the yard and press each cloth under clear water. The boy works the corners, the attendant works the centers, the tub holds the day's quiet in a bright ring. They wring the towels by twisting in opposite directions until water runs soft rather than steady. The towels will visit the fullers tomorrow, but for tonight they hang over a rope where a rising breeze plays the part of patience. Back inside, the attendant makes a slow tour of flames. One lamp is pinched out with wetted fingers, another is lowered to a compuro. In the furnace room, he draws the iron door almost shut and slides a brick into its gap to coax a slow overnight breath. The hypocaust will sleep warm, then wake without stubbornness. He taps the tiles lightly. They answer with a round sound that means all is well enough. On the bench, he leaves a single folded towel as a signal to himself, a custom he's kept for years. If it remains in the morning exactly as he placed it, he knows no night foot strayed where it shouldn't. Near the oil shelf, he sets a small dish with 3 bay leaves and a twist of thyme. The air will carry a faint herbal memory by dawn that says clean in a language noses understand without translation. The boy brings the broom made from river reeds bound with twine. Together, they sweep from the far corners toward the door, always pulling dust toward exit, never pushing it deeper into corners. The sound is a low, dry hush, like someone telling a kindly secret. The last sweep sends a faint line of powder into the yard, where wind adopts it and gives it other work. The wax tablet receives the day's final writing, fire-banked, lamp set, pull skinned, towels rinsed, shelf wiped. Hinges fed, he smooths a space and adds a small star next to thankfulness, a private habit that changes nothing and seems to improve everything. Keys hang from a loop at his belt. He tests the door latch that closes with the exact sound he likes, neither thin nor heavy. He stands a moment in the quiet. He made the way a cook tastes a sauce one last time, not to correct it, but to agree with it. Outside, the street smells faintly of charcoal and bread. Night draws the city into smaller shapes. The attendant hands the boy the lighter basket, the heavier he carries himself. They walk side by side toward their own doors, feet remembering warm tile and cool stone in equal measure. Night makes its case by degrees. The street thins to footsteps, and a cart's last wooden sigh. Inside, the rooms glow in small islands. Each lamp looks like a quiet thought that forgot to leave. The attendant returns for the final round, not to work hard, but to agree with what the rooms already know. He sets his hand on the warm room wall. Heat answers in a low hum that says, "Enough for now." At the furnace, he listens before he looks. The ember bed has become a red map with slow rivers. He skims a thin layer of ash over the brightest lanes. Ash is not an ending, it is a blanket. The iron door closes to a coin's width. A clay shard slides into the gap to teach the night how to breathe without appetite. The boy brings the wicker basket's lid. The day's towels, well rinsed, rest in neat folds near the rope where air is honest. He points to a stitch he made along the basket, rinse shy, but proud. The attendant nods once, the nod that means a lesson has settled where it will live. They set the lid in place and leave the basket to dream under the eaves. On the shelf, the amphories stand like quiet neighbors. The attendant wipes each lip with a damp cloth and writes small figures on the wax tablet. ROS for rosemary, PO for plain. Beside each a number that will mean something to tomorrow's purchase. He turns the tablet toward the window so the last light can lay its opinion on the marks. Satisfied, he blots one corner with his thumb until the surface shines. Ledger before memory fades. Memory before sleep. He lifts the strigils one by one. He holds them to the lamplight, tests each edge with the soft pad of his thumb. A wet pebble whispers along to curves, barely a sound, more like the idea of a sound. He rubs a breath of oil along the bronze so air will not chew at it by night. He places each tool down in the same place it woke this morning. Tools prefer to be found where they learn to wait. The hand basin receives fresh water. He adds a finger of vinegar. He dips the bristle brush and draws it once around the basin's rim, lifting the day's faint ring. A cloth finishes what the brush began. He tips the basin to the doorway and lets the thin stream find the drain. Water leaves without complaint when it is given a clear path. He walks the mosaic's edge. A tessera has loosened near the cold pool, a small square no wider than a nail. He kneels. From a dish he takes a pinch of lime, a breath of sand, a drop of water. He makes a paste with the same calm that he would butter bread. He presses the square home and smooths the seam with a wet finger. The stone remembers its neighbors and settles. He stays a moment with his hand on the spot, as if telling it a short story about staying put. The lamps accept their night shape. One is pinched between wetted fingers to our Lord until their flames resemble commas, not periods. The last lamp remains awake in the vestibule, facing the street the way a dog faces a door. He trims its wick square, patient, exact. A lamp that is set properly at night wakes like a good-tempered friend. They step into the yard to listen. Night birds practice an alphabet that never quite becomes a word. Somewhere a poplid taps, then settles. The boy yawns the private yawn of someone who is pleased to be tired. The attendant tells him to go. Sleep starts tomorrow, he says, his voice as flat and kind as a folded towel. The boy salutes with 2 fingers and slips away down the lane where shutters have become thinking faces. Alone, the attendant returns to the bench near the entrance. He opens his small coin purse and tips it onto the wood. Coins lie in a patient scatter. He sorts them by size, then by tone, brass to brass, copper to copper, the way a musician might group notes. He counts into languages, out loud in 10s, silent in the 3s and 4s. He slides 1 coin to the left for the furnace man who came on short notice last week. He places 2 to the right for the fuller whose vinegar is always fresh. In the center, he leaves enough for the basket maker, and marks a star on the wax for the twine seller who accepts payment in oil on occasion, at gentle. Aside, accounts are not only silver and copper, they are also favors that do not tarnish. He tucks the coins away and opens a small wooden box. Inside rest the tiny things that hold a day together: spare corks, a folded scrap of wool, 3 reed tongues, a splinter of beeswax, a sliver of pumice kept for one last use. He arranges them with 2 fingers, not fussy, simply exact. He writes a single line at the bottom of the wax: everyone washed, no one slept. It is not a number, yet it is the one that makes him sleep. He draws the entrance shutter to its last inch and hooks it. The vestibule lamp throws a soft triangle onto tile. He stands in it a moment, not to admire but to check the shade of the light. It is the color he likes. The room looks friendly to any honest nightfoot. He tests the door's bar. Wood finds wood with a fit learned through many evenings. The latch settles with that round sound that means morning will not groan. He steps into the street. Air tastes cool, faintly of olives and smoke. Across the way, a woman draws water from a jar with a cup that never splashes. The bakery's mouth, now dark, keeps the day's warmth like a sleeping dog. The attendant carries the small basket with the wax tablet and the box of tiny tools. Under his arm, a folded towel. Even though he'd bathe by task all day, he likes to keep one cloth with him until home reminds it to become laundry. His walk is a pattern he could follow with eyes shut. Past the corner where cobbles remember wheels, past the wall with fig leaves that make their own night, past the shrine whose little flame does not compete with the sky. He stops at the shrine and leaves a bay leaf from his pocket. The leaf is not much. The gesture is the correct size. Home is a single room shifted into 4. He sets the basket on a low shelf. He hangs his keys on the peg that prefers them. He tips a small cup of water into a clay bowl and fits his hands into it the way a pot fits the kiln. He rubs the day from his fingers with 3 strokes of olive oil and a scrap of wool. The oil carries grit and the bright ghost of rosemary to the cloth. He folds the cloth to hide the mark and lays it by the door so tomorrow's first task is already started. He eats the fig the vendor gave him. It is sweeter than he expected and leaves a seed at the back of his tooth that he will find tomorrow. He chews bread he saved from midday and adds it to the day's account of small satisfactions. He fills a shallow saucer, sets it near the little household altar, and says no words. The act is the speech. He sits on the step of his own threshold and sets the wax tablet on his knee. He smooths the surface with a warm blade until today is a shine that has learned what it needed to learn. In the corner of the tablet, He keeps a thin column of marks that is not for stock or coins. It is a practice of gratitude in objects. Tonight he writes, strigil edges true. Boy stitch held. Pull honest, he adds, as he sometimes does, heat-tempered, and underlines it with a patient finger. He checks his sandals for grit and taps the soles together. He drapes tomorrow's tunic over the stool so the fold will fall away by dawn. He lifts his head once to the night. The sky has its own ledger, stars in small councils, an arc that says when to rise and when to bank a fire. He reads only the first line and finds it enough. He lies down on his mat with the towel folded under his head. The towel smells faintly of oil and steam and chalk and the clean part of water. He turns onto his side, the way he advises people to lie when their backs are unsure. Sleep approaches like a well-trained lamp, not rushed, not dim, simply willing. The bath sleeps, too. The furnace keeps a small red heart. The cold pool rests like polished thought. The ore rests in its jars. The strigils, white and oiled, dream of backs they will meet. Night passes a coal hand across tile and leaves no wake. If your breath has maxed these rooms, let it keep that pace. If your eyes are heavy, let them close without needing to be told. The day holds together. Tomorrow already understands how to begin. Let us step softly into Yedo, when the city's houses are lamplit from within and paper walls glow like small moons. Tonight's path belongs to the collectors of what the fields will want tomorrow, an humble trade that walks after curfew, when shoes sound louder and lanterns draw neat circles on the ground. We will move at their pace, listening for water in the ditches and the distant sigh of a canal boat turning its oar. A gentle reminder as we begin. In this city, what others might discard is part of a careful loop. The soil expects its share, and people oblige it without fuss. The work wears plain clothes, carries simple tools, and keeps the streets ready for morning. Our collector, let's call him Jen, starts in a lean-to shed tucked behind a cooper's yard. The shed smells of cedar staves and lamp oil. On a peg hangs the shoulder pole, a tendon worn smooth where hands have agreed with it for years. Two lidded wooden pails wait beneath, their rims fought over often by rope and time, but still round. He lifts the pole, finding the balance the way a tune finds its key, then hangs the pails from iron hooks that know their job. Each bucket lid turns with a quick, practiced half-twist. Hinges answer with a mild click. Everything wants to behave. Tools live together in a small basket, a bamboo ladle, a narrow scoop, a soft brush, a handful of rice bran, a folded cloth, and two wooden wedges that help lids sit tight when roads grow stubborn. He adds a scrap of paper with the night's route, more talisman than map. His feet already know. A small hand copper bell rests at the bottom. He rarely rings it. The bell's presence is enough. Before stepping out, Jen checks the lantern. The frame is bamboo. The paper is mended in 3 places, neat patches like healed cuts. A thumb-sized reservoir of oil feeds the wick. He trims the wick straight with a tiny knife and breathes the flame awake. Light fills the paper and makes it blush. He lowers the lantern from a peg and hangs it on the pole's middle hook. It will ride there, a tame star that keeps shadows polite. He chooses his sandals for the hour get a none to taw, so steps won't clatter. The strap has been retied with new cord. He rubs a little tallow into it with his sleeve so it will not argue with skin. He wraps a faded towel around his neck, not for show, But for small comforts, a wipe for hands, a shield for a shoulder, a pad for a sudden itch. Outside, the alley receives him with low sounds. Somewhere a brazier is being encouraged. Someone closes a door with 2 fingers so it won't bark. Cats compose patience along eaves. Jin lifts the pole and settles it across his shoulders. Waiter eyes with honesty. He leans a degree left, then right, testing. The pails swing together once, and then agree on a quiet rhythm. He sets off. The city's lanes are narrow letters written to moonlight. Houses line them like careful script, tile roofs here, shingled roofs there, all with eaves that know the proper angle for rain. The night carries the mild tang of soy and smoke, and the clean thread of river that slips like a soft thought between words. Jen walks at the pace of work, not fast, not lazy, letting the pole speak to his spine, letting the lantern draw a small world at his feet. He calls very gently at the first gate, a 3-note sound that is more greeting than claim. In Edo, collectors and households keep an arrangement that is both simple and exact. Some pay with coin, others with rice straw, many with the agreement that the fields will reimburse the city through vegetables when seasons agree. A door slides back a hand's width. A house servant nods. They have expected him. A narrow wooden tub is produced from behind the lattice, lifted with 2 hands, its lid tied crosswise with cord. Jin sets his pole on its rest, a low forked stick that travels with him and asks nothing. He lifts one bucket lid 1/3 of the way and tucks it under with the small wedge so it will not fall. He works without hurry. The bamboo ladle whispers against wood, gathers, and pours. Rice bran folds over liquid and makes the scent behave, turning sharp edges into dull ones. Nothing spills. The tub empties in patient repetitions. When it is done, Jen wipes the rim with the folded cloth, hands the tub back with both hands, and accepts a small coin that clicks like a polite punctuation mark into his palm. The servant thanks him in a word so low it seems to be part of the night. The door settles into its track with a sound like a sentence ending. A gentle aside, the value of this work is not a secret here. Farmers speak of city contracts as steady blessings. Households keep their accounts in tidy columns. And Jen, crossing a ward with 2 pails and a flame, is one hinge in a door that keeps opening between town and field. He moves on. At the corner, a shrine sits under a pine. The lantern pauses there on its own as if to bow. Jin sets one palm against the stone base, not for prayer as much as for measure cool stone answering warm skin. He walks again. The canal whispers ahead, and an oar dreams against a boat's side. Beyond it, barges sleep with cargo, nets loosened into the shape of clouds. At the second stop, an elderly couple has set their tub on a small stool to ease his lift. Thoughtfulness travels both directions here. They offer him a sip of weak tea. He warms his hand on the cup, drinks half, returns the rest so the act remains generous, but not wasteful. He notices the way their paper screens have been mended with different papers, one pale, one with a faint chrysanthemum. Beauty keeps company with economy when rooms are small and careful. He keeps to the left side of the lane where the drainage is honest and the stones know his step. The pole makes a low song against his shoulder, the kind that stays in a body longer than in the ear. Between houses, the night deepens, where a shop's eaves stretch wide. Light brightens under them, and the lantern seems to smile. A constable passes at a measured pace. They exchange a bow that contains the terms of their world. Curfew for most, passage for some, quiet for all. The constable's staff touches ground 3 times after they separate, a rhythm that folds back into the night's other soft counts that drip at a corner, the ropes creak on a moored boat, the moth's idea of a circle about Jin's flame. Third house, a carpenter's place, the air tasting faintly of shavings even at this hour. The tub here is heavier. Jin sets his feet apart the way experience taught him, knees soft, back straight. The ladle's work is slow, he refuses haste. Ash from a clay bowl helps the mix remember to be dignified. He thanks the house with a nod that belongs to both sides of the threshold. Payment here is a future promise, a small bundle of offcuts for kindling, to be collected when the next door is mended. He marks it on a strip of paper with a charcoal stroke and tucks it under the lid cord. Between stops, he does tiny maintenance, as the road allows. He checks the lid wedge, tightens a knot in the carry rope, rubs his shoulder with the edge of the towel. When a strap threatens to chafe, he moves it a finger's width and the complaining stops. He tests the lantern wick and pinches it shorter by the smallest pinch. The flame answers by smoothing its breath. As the pails grow heavier, his pace lightens in small adjustments, a slightly shorter step where stones are meaner, a longer one where earth admits forgiveness. He travels streets that are already polished by feet like his. Ahead, the ward gate stands like an unmoving thought. He will pass under it in a handful of breaths, then enter a lane where fishmongers will wake first and where nets hang like sleeping sails. For now, he visits a row of rented rooms set behind a shared well. The residents keep a tidy roster by the well's frame. Jin's name rests there in brushstrokes, slender and confident. A young mother opens her paper door with 2 hands and sets out a small tub. She bows. He bows. Few words, sufficient exchange. He notices a string of radish peels drying under the eaves. Nothing in this city wishes to be useless for long. The night accepts another circuit of steps, and the pail's weight becomes a steady companion rather than an argument. The lantern draws its circle across thresholds and back again. The tendon speaks to shoulder and spine, and the shoulder and spine answer with the old understanding. We carry, and we are carried by the way we carry. The ward gate waits like a quiet eyebrow, lifted but not unkind. Jin approaches in the small cone of his lantern and touches the post with 2 fingers, a courtesy more habit than rule. The gate's crossbar is already propped for night passage. Constables prefer to guide rather than fuss. A watchman steps out of the little booth with his staff and an apron of woven reeds. He recognizes Jin the way streets recognize a regular footfall. A nod occurs, then a second nod that counts as permission. Jin unhooks a palm-sized wooden token from his belt, paint worn to a comfortable blank, and shows it. The watchman holds it to his lamp, not to doubt it, only to let light complete the ritual. He records the time with a brush dipped in water over a slate, then presses the damp mark onto a thin paper that will dry into memory. The staff taps once, the gate and the night agree. Jin passes through. Beyond the gate, the lane loosens into a wider path where warehouses crouch like sleeping oxen. Roof lines run straight as a ruler. The canal, just beyond, reflects them as if learning to write. Lanterns on the water are smaller than land lamps, their glow made patient by breath and ripple. Jin's own flame, riding at his pole's center, draws a golden oval on the ground that keeps pace like a well-trained dog. The canal has its own our language. Ropes creak like old knees. Oars practice small hyphens. A boatman coughs once to tell the night he remembers his place in it. Jin steps onto the timber wharf. The boards, springy and familiar, get a teeth. He sets the pole across a wooden sawhorse that knows its job and lets his shoulders lengthen again into their unburdened shape. Mata, a farmer's cousin who minds the boat most nights, lifts his cap and lets a yawn have its way. He has the square hands of someone who measures by handfuls. "Good flow?" he asks in a voice tuned low enough not to travel. Jen answers with the small tilt that means steady, then points with his chin to the lidded pails. Mata taps each lid tap, listening for fullness the way a potter listens to clay. Satisfied, he brings out the boat's gear, a broad-bellied receiving tub scrubbed whiter than you would expect, two wooden funnels shaped like patient bells, and a ladle whose handle is as long as a musician's bow. A gentle aside, Ido's loop runs here, visible if you squint city to field, field to bowl, bowl to city. Coins move, yes, but so do nutrients. And the exchange rate is measured in vegetables as much as in copper. Jin kneels on a padded plank to keep knees from arguing. He wedges each pail lid open by a thumb's width, enough to work, not enough to invite the night air into boldly. Mata seats the first funnel and steadies it with one hand. Jin works the ladle with the other, slow draw, slow pour, letting bulk become a calm stream. Rice bran follows each ladle, dusting the surface like polite snow, turning sharpness into something the canal can stand to be near. The boat accepts the transfer without complaint, rocking once, then remembering to behave. They speak in the shorthand of people who have repeated one task enough to braid words out of it. Upper ward tomorrow, yes. Rain into nights, I'll ficken bran. Far edge of the patties wants a little extra. I'll note it. The ladle's rhythm makes commas. For the talk, the canal's lap writes the periods. When one receiving tub nears comfort, Mata fits a lid that has lived on it long enough to know its shape. He seals the scene with a run of dampened straw rope that smells faintly of last summer, then ties it with a knot that comes apart by thinking about it in the morning. He sets the tub low in the boat's belly, centered to keep the night's balance. A second tub wheels forward across a straw mat, all softness and intention. Jin checks the pails with his usual small tests. Weight left, weight right, rope bite on the pole's notch, lid wedge set firm. He adds a touch of oil to the pole's center, hook so the lantern will not complain when turns grow tight. He wipes the ladle's lip with his towel, folds the cloth over the used edge, and tucks it under the belt so the clean corner points outward. Decisions like this turn long hours into hours that do not scold the body later. Mata opens a ledger that smells of rice paste and river. His brush is a cheap one, but he trims the tip each week to keep it honest. He writes Jin's name with a gentle beginning and an equal ending, then marks tonight's count in units that look like small fences. Beside it he adds a farmer's mark, a humble crest scratched years ago by a fingernail, so the fields will know whom to thank when the turnips are pleased. He dries the brush against the ledger's margin, leaves a pale fan of strokes that resembles a ghost of straw, and places a smooth pebble over the page so the night won't turn it. Payment here is half coin, half credit in vegetables to be delivered to a market stall at a later dawn. Mata slides two small coppers into Jin's palm, not quite warm, not quite cold. He adds a thin wooden chit stamped with a beet leaf. Jin will hand that slip to the vendor when the season agrees. His wife will bargain for greens without needing to calculate too much. In this economy, mathematics happens in kitchens and paddies as often as in ledgers. They pause to let a barge pass. Its load is charcoal bundled tight as pillows, the kind that gives a clean, even burn. The barge's bow wears a rope fringe that skims the canal's alphabet into lowercase. From the deck, a boy's hum drifts across, tuneless but sincere, a sound good for staying awake. The two men answer with that worker's courtesy of not interrupting another's chosen method of keeping time. When the second receiving tub is sealed and settled, Mata tucks a sprig of mugwort under the lid cord, a custom his aunt says keeps mischief from noticing. Jin does not argue custom. It harms no one and pleases someone. He straightens, rolls each shoulder once, then sets a palm flat to the boat's gunwale. The wood is cool, slightly damp, and carries a memory of sun from noon. He likes to take that temperature with him, a measure of the night's honest chill. They go over small notices. Tomorrow's gate post is being repaired, best to use the side lane near the awning shop. The boat will leave earlier 1 hour from now on. Farmers want more time to turn and cover before sun begins to insist. Rain barrels near the shrine are full again. Rinse water will be easy to borrow if needed. These facts are the broom and dustpan of their trade, and romantic and completely useful. Mata pushes off with the long pole and the boat slides a body's width, setting the canal surface back into its preferred order. He lifts to fingers in a parting that is about as large as the night requests. Jin lifts to fingers in return, then nests the pail's hooks on his pole, checks the lantern, and stands. Weight climbs his frame and sits where it belongs. He breathes into the balance, and the balance breathes back. On the way up from the wharf, he pauses at a stone where carriers set poles to rest. The groove is deep from years of shoulders saying enough in the same place. He rests just long enough to taste the pause, then lifts again. A cat crosses with no interest in his work. A moth circles his lantern once and decides the world is larger. A gentle aside, many cities bury their problems. Ito trades with them. Night soil will journey to compost pits beyond the last houses, mixed with straw, turned with forks, heated by microbes that do their task without asking for thanks. Months later, the very plainness of this tonight will reappear as the extra gloss on a leaf of mustard, the crispness in a radish, the green confidence in a scallion. The Luke prefers regular hands to grand speeches. Jen passes back under the ward gate. The watchman marks his board with a water brush once more. Return, safe. Noted, then wipes the slate with his sleeve and starts again with a clean page the way knights do. Inside the gate, lanes re-narrow to their preferred width. The smell turns gently toward kitchen charcoal and pickles, thinking about tomorrow's rice. He angles into a district of inns, where travelers' sandals rest in tidy rows, and paper walls hold the ocean of other people's dreams at bay. Here, tubs are many and smaller, lids tied in a way that suggests different hands on different days. Jin rolls his shoulders once more, hears the pole answer, and sets his lantern so its circle falls kindly on the first stoop. The inn quarter holds its breath in neat rows of sandals. Doorway shelves display them like commas in a long sentence, spares facing outward, straps resting as if they too are asleep. Jin lowers the pole onto his traveling rest, that forked stick with a habit of standing exactly where he asks it to. His lantern finds the right height by memory. The paper glows, patient and even. At the first in, a clerk in a cotton jacket opens the lattice by to finger widths. A coil of incense draws a slow figure on the air. He has already set a small tub on a tray so Tatami won't complain. Jen answers with a bow that says received more than it says hello. He loosens one little thumb span, lifts with the bamboo ladle, and guides each pour to the funnel's calm mouth. The rice bran dusts after each motion, a careful blanket that keeps scent polite. The clerk touches a brush to a wooden tally, adding a short stroke that will mean one visit when morning speaks in numbers again. Payment will be settled at week's end. Tonight prefers silence over arithmetic. Tatami underfoot answers Jen's weight with a whisper. He never drags the pole across it. Instead he steps, places, and lifts, giving the room nothing to forgive. A guest turns over behind a paper wall. Futon rustling like a mild breeze in bamboo. He keeps the lantern's circle small. A moving moon that chooses not to wake the tide. Each in along this lane repeats the pattern with its own handwriting. One offers a pinch of pickled plum to keep the mouth busy, another hands him a thimble of warm tea. He accepts or declines by gesture, careful to honor the giver and the heir alike. At one doorway the clerk has tied the tub's cord in a thoughtful cross that makes lifting easy. Jen aunties it, then readies the same knot after the work is done, letting small kindness return to its place. A gentle aside, this quarter hosts travelers, merchants with counted beads, pilgrims with counted steps. Their rooms are small, and their rest depends on others' careful habits. The collector is part porter, part tide, arriving between dull strikes and leaving no mark but a white rim and a settled cord. The lane tapers, then relaxes into a back alley where walls stand closer than neighbors, but behave just as well. Water gutters speak in a thin thread. Here, small rented rooms share a communal board with charcoal notes about whose turn it is to clean the well bucket, and which cat requires shoeing without fuss. Jin's name appears in brushwork that looks like someone took their time learning each stroke. He smiles without moving his mouth. He visits doors and around, the order set long ago by a logic that keeps disagreements from finding a foothold. A widow in a blue coat opens first and keeps her eyes at her hands. She likes the assurance of task over talk. A young man with ink-stained fingers opens next. His tub is lighter because he reads late and forgets to eat early. A peddler's room offers a tub wrapped in straw, so the lift won't bruise the wood. Jen notes the wrapping and will return the courtesy with an extra fold in the wipe. These differences are small, but they add up to streets that do not scold their walkers. From somewhere far off, wooden clappers speak to sharp taps, then to again. The night patrol announces steady ground, not alarm, then lets the quiet stitch itself back together. Jen knows their route in a loose way. He also knows the bell tower's schedule. One slow strike not long ago, the next resting a little further in the dark. Ito counts time with intervals named by animals and shadow. Workers count by tasks and corners. Both methods are true enough if you keep your feet honest. The pails grow heavier as the hour stretches, so Jin shortens his step by the width of a finger and lowers his elbows half a hand. These are not theories. They are lessons wrists and hips have taught him. He shifts the pole to sit slightly more to the right for 2 houses, then back to center where stones turn tricky. A loose plank in the drainage bridge receives his weight. He hears the board complain and answers by placing the rest stick as a second thought. then crossing as one person and 2 points, rather than one person and 1. The board quiets. The crossing forgets to be a problem. At a small shrine tucked into a wall's inward bend, a lantern the size of a fist keeps a kernel of light alive. Jen leaves a sliver of dried persimmon on the stone. It is not an offering in the grand sense, only a habit that teaches his hands a posture. A moth circles his flame once, writes a small letter on the night, and vanishes into a page he cannot turn. He reaches an inn that serves boatmen. The tubs here are regular and tied with a sailor's respect for rope. The clerk, an older woman, greets him with a nod that carries many years. She offers a cloth damp with cool water and a few grains of salt pressed into its fold. 1 minute of ease on the back of the neck. Jen thanks her with both hands and returns the cloth folded differently to show he noticed the care as an object, not only as relief. She sets aside a bundle of kindling for him to collect at week's end. The ledger will remember it even if she does not need to. Another alley, quieter still, holds sleeping workshops. A brushmaker's doorway smells faintly of horsehair and glue. A lantern left for luck throws a sliver of light across trees where bristles rest like rows of river reeds. Jen lifts the small household tub, notes a new mend on the lid, and takes care to set it down later exactly as the repair prefers. Respect for a fix is respect for the hand that made it. The hour between bells arrives, not declared, but felt when even the brazier's charcoal seems to breathe less. Air takes on a softer cool, skin hears it before ears do. Jen's lantern looks larger against walls, not brighter, only somehow more certain. Footsteps of distant carriers go by in another lane, and their poles speak a chord he knows. He answers by not changing his pace. A dog barks once the way a door knocks itself from the inside, then remembers that sleep has rang. He pauses where back lanes cross like woven straw. He rests the pole on the traveling fork, rolls a shoulder, and checks the lashings again. A cord that might rub becomes a cord that will not. He pinches the wick shorter. The flame smooths without sulking. He rubs a smear of oil into the pole's center notch where the lantern hook rides, then wipes the extra with his towel so tomorrow won't find a surprise. Maintenance is not a chore tonight. It is a method of letting morning begin without needing an apology. 2 more ends, each with its own way of doing the same thing. One clerk keeps a copper coin in a teacup so that will not wander. Another writes Jen's name on a pine slip and tucks it under a stone by the door, a promise that the week's totals will meet him at the corner market. He nods once. He trusts systems that are simple enough to survive naps. He turns down a lane where laundry poles make a roof for the night. Cloth flutters and dreams. A child coughs twice and then forgets the cough existed. Here, a house has placed 2 tubs side by side, lids knotted like brothers. Jen handles them as if they were. A gentle aside, some cities imagine purity as absence. This place imagines it as circulation. What leaves returns as something a bull can recognize and welcome. The collector's route is a soft river that never appears on any map yet waters more ground than the canals ever will. The bell finally gives its slow, rounded note from the tower, one sound that seems to hang from the roof beams of the whole quarter. Jen lets it pass through him and does nothing to hurry. The pails are near their workable limit. One more cluster of houses will fill the night's plan to an even edge. He angles toward the lane that will lead him back to the canal and to Mata's boat, where sealed tubs sit like patient moons. Clouds gather without hurry, the way a sleeve folds itself when hands are busy elsewhere. Jen tastes damp in the air before the first drop decides to be brave. He answers by slipping the towel from his neck, twisting it once to wake the fibers, and wrapping it under the pole where would meet shoulder, a narrow kindness to future bones. The lane tips slightly toward the canal here, and stones polished buyers consider their options. Rain arrives as a practiced guest, 3 large drops to introduce itself, then a fine, even patter that edits sound without silencing it. Jen shortens his step by the quiet width of a thumb and lets his knees become springs instead of hooks. The pails answer with smaller arcs. The lantern's circle keeps its size by staying close. A gentle aside, tools enjoy being asked rather than ordered. A pole will give balance if you invite it. A lid will sit well if you explain the road to it with a touch. In wet weather the city lends slipperiness to both feet and thought. Habits provide the sand that helps. He turns onto a stone bridge whose planks remember sun better than they understand rain. A trickle runs under the railing like a thin laugh. Jen plants his traveling fork 2 legs remembering trees halfway across, sets the pole upon it, and readies the right-hand bucket's lid cord with a sailor's bend learned from watchmen. The old knot has started to polish itself into looseness. He cinches it until the wood remembers being one thing again. He checks the left lid, firm. Then the lantern, wick trimmed, frame tightened by a thumb's pressure at the bamboo hoop where paper meets rib. The rain has plans to briefly forget itself into being heavier. Jen shifts from geta to straw waraji he keeps rolled in a net bag on his belt for this very argument. He sits on the bridge rail, toes hooked under beam, and works quickly. Slip off the wooden teeth, tuck them into the net, bind straw cords across in step and ankle. Straw listens to wet, wood negotiates with it. Tonight prefers listeners. A small detour calls to him a side lane where he's lean close enough to shake hands. A family there tends a tea stall by day. At night they place their tub beside a bamboo screen painted with plum blossoms that keep blooming regardless of season. Jen adds their stop when rain visits. The main alley floods easily and tells lies about depth. The side lane stays honest, its puddles content with being shallow. At the stall, a father has left a cup turned upside down as a request that requires no words. If the collector wishes, warm water waits in the brazier. Jen rights the cup, pours to fingers, and holds them to his cheek rather than his mouth. Heat does not care where it comforts. He tips the rest back to the kettle with a nod to the fire. The tub is light tonight. The family has sold many bowls and used little water for themselves. He works the ladle's slow curve, adds a hush of bran, wipes the rim with deliberate circles, and readies the cord in the knot they favor, simple, symmetrical, easy for small hands to undo at dawn. Rain chooses to be generous for a quarter hour. Jen moves with Rain's grammar pauses, undereaves, commas at corners, long sentences where the lane straightens, and nothing argues. He passes a shutter where tofu drains behind a screen. The liquid sings into a pail at a rhythm so even it could keep time for carriers. He notes the stall's tub in the morning, heavier than others. The stall keeper will be glad to see him return before the breakfast customers arrive. He makes a mark on his route paper with charcoal, a square for tofu, a dot for stop early. The road asked for another small repair. A strap on the pole's center hook has begun to whine in the way leather does when it misses oil. Jen rubs a touch of sesame into it from a tiny gourd corked against spills. He turns the strap once, spreads the oil with the back of his thumbnail, and speaks to the leather the way you speak to a cat, not with words, but with patience. The strap remembers you for a moment and stops complaining. A watchman at the end of the lane leans under his straw hat, rain making a soft drum above his ears. They share news the way night workers do. A roof tile slipped 3 doors past the dye shop. Avoid the narrow cut by the sake storehouse where a board lifts its edges in wet. The fishmonger's quarter smells friendlier than usual. Tonight's storm moved the river and left a clean edge. Jen thanks him with a bow that includes the rain between them. He cuts across a courtyard shared by 3 families, each with a different idea of how to keep plants cheerful. One keeps herbs in roof tiles laid sideways, another strings gourd shells along a fence, the third suspends a wooden frame where morning glories will write in blue when summer returns. Their tubs sit in a row, lids tied with cords of varying age. One knot has sulked and slipped. Jen ties it without commentary. He leaves a small loop easy to find in darkness. Small changes, briefly explained to wood and rope, become work that does not break. The pails reach a working fullness again. He considers weight like a carpenter considers level eyes, and wrists share the reading. The rain turns from words to mist, then to memory. Waraji keep their grip. Straw loves a problem it can soak into solution. Jen tests the pole against his shoulder with the towel folded twice, then moves on to the tofu alley, where first light so faint it is only gray. Thinking about being gray considers arriving. The tofu man wakes exactly like a shop does. 1 board at a time, 1 apron string, 1 yon given to a back room. He slides the tub forward with 2 hands used to carrying rectangles. Jen adds rice bran by habit, soy scent and bran speak politely when in company. The shopkeeper thanks him with a nod and sets aside a coin in a shallow dish already wet with gratitude. A gentle aside, many tasks agree with the weather better when done at a particular hour. Collectors carry night the way gardeners carry noon. Each time knows its tools. Rain is a teacher that praises those who choose straw over pride, and knots that admit they want revision. He arrives at the dye shop's rear gate, where indigo tubs sleep with boards across to discourage curiosity. The family's small tub waits on a low stool covered by a cloth printed with leaves. The cloth smells faintly of lie and morning. Jen finishes the transfer with extra care. A splash here would write the wrong letter on everyone's belongings. He sets the lid, wipes twice, then once again, because dye travels farther than one expects when invited. Back toward the canal, the lane passes a cooper's yard, waking into the day before the day agrees it is time. A boar rolls a hoop quietly, practicing the art of being circular. Staves lean in fans against a shed, and rain draws a line down each one, darkening wood into a clean, even chorus. Jen rests the pole on his traveling fork beside the yard's gate and tests each hook again. He pinches the lantern wick shorter. Dawn will soon make flame unnecessary, and the lantern likes to be retired before it feels useless. The route asks for one last detour, a temple that keeps a small dormitory for out-of-town students. Their tubs are always consistent, modest, predictable, tied with disciplined knots. The caretaker meets him with a bow that reaches the floor. Jen answers with one that reaches only halfway because deep bows are a kind of currency. and he prefers to keep accounts balanced. The caretaker whispers a request for an early visit next month during exams. Jen marks a slender line on his route slip, then tucks the paper back under the lid cord where it rides dry and obedient. When he can feel fullness in the way the pole settles rather than in the effort of lifting, Jen turns toward the canal. Rain becomes a few well-meant drops waving goodbye from roof corners. The stone underfoot says thank you by not trying to surprise him. The ward gate receives him from this side with the same lifted brow, and the watchman marks his slate with a damp brush out, in, out again, each stroke drying invisible and true. Dawn arrives the way warm water does, a quiet widening. Roof lines step out of their own shadows. Jen turns down the last lane toward the canal, listening to the city rehearse its first sounds. A broom braids straw across stone. A kettle finds its voice in a far room, somewhere. An apprentice sneezes at flour and returns to kneading. Mata is already on the wharf with sleeves tied up, head pushed back so light can reach the work. The boat knows morning by the feel of hands. To sealed receiving tubs, its centered cords damp, but obedient, mugwort sprigs tucked under each knot as promised. Mata has placed fresh funnel bells and the ladle on a cloth that used to be a shoulder wrap, soft, clean, resigned to its second career. Jen's lantern finds the sawhorse and takes its new posture, useful, not needed, still honored. Steady weather now, Mata says, letting the river finish speaking first. Jen answers with the tilt that means yes. He lifts the first pail lid a patient thumb's width and gives the ladle the day's pace, slow, sure. Bran after each pour. The rain has washed the night's edges from the air, even the canal approves. Holding its breath like a good assistant. They work without hurry, trading short notes that office clerks would call mistakes because they are not written, though they never fail. Upper ward tomorrow. Yes, TOEFL lane first, marked. Far fields want richer mix. We'll set it aside. Words small enough to tuck into knots. When the boat's third receiving tub reaches its comfortable fullness, Mata seals the lid with damp straw rope, and a palm's press that persuades wood to remember itself. He chalks a small circle on the rim, one simple sign, so, out among paddies, the right farmer will be greeted by the right mixture. The ledger opens. Jen's name lands on the page with a stroke that neither bows nor boasts. A pebble holds the sheet from wandering in the air's new ambition. A gentle aside. Here, sorting is a kind of respect, thick for plots that ask for strength, lighter for roots that prefer subtle conversation. The city does not send waste, it sends recipes. They slide the last of the night into the boat's belly. Mata sets a plank across the gunwales and checks balance by the argument of his knees. He nods once and pushes the pole gently. The hull answers with a small satisfied shiver. We'll go out on the turn after breakfast, he says. Tides, even on a canal, are a citizen's polite rumor felt as much as measured. The countryside will receive this cargo with lids lifted like good mornings. Jen turns to the washing platform, a set of stones that accept water and work in equal measure. He kneels, keeps his weight over his heels, and begins the part of the craft that most resembles prayer. Lids first, wipe, rinse, wipe again, then lean to dry against a slatted frame that has known so many mornings it creaks like a friendly elder. Pails next, a round brush of rice straw, clever at corners, goes in with the same patience as the night's ladle. He uses thin lye water from a jar left near the shrine made by someone's, and from wood ash, carrying yesterday's hearth into today's cleanliness. A few steps away, a woman rinses greens in a tub. She watches Jin work the rims, the same way he watches her check leaves for snails, with the quiet respect of one routine recognizing another. She lifts 3 scallions, ties them with a strip of dry gourd skin, and sets them where his hand will find them without needing to reach. He sets a wet lid to drain and slides the scallions onto his towel. No coin moves. The city's softer economy prefers favors braided into mornings. Jane oils the pole where shoulder meets wood, a line thin as a reed shadow. He rubs a fingertip across the lantern's bamboo hoop, coaxing out last night's damp. The paper has taken nothing that sun cannot forgive. He trims the wick so it will not sulk in storage and slides the hook to its rest, letting the ring click once, like a hinge remembering its manners. Now the market gate begins its recital. Stalls open with rhythms, tie, lift, fold, arrange. The tofu man's ladle taps the lip of a bucket, the fishmonger speaks to the river in low syllables, the pickle seller turns jars just so, letting light name the colors plum, mustard, seaweed green. A tea seller stirs a pot and approves the steam by nodding to it. Jane crosses the lane and places his thin wooden chit, the one stamped with a beet leaf, on the vendor's mat. The woman behind the basket smiles in the way people do when credit keeps promises. She fills a shallow tray, a pale daikon, a handful of mizuna, 2 leaves of mustard with the kind of gloss that makes a cook reconsider the salt. Jin gathers them into his cloth and tucks the chit back into its hiding place. It will return to model later, its work finished for now. A gentle aside. Ledgers keep the city awake, but breakfasts keep it kind. A slip of wood travels farther than one might think, both to stall, to kitchen, to bowl, earning courtesy at each stop. He returns to the washing platform, stacks the cleaned lids in pairs so they won't eavesdrop on dust, and sets the pail's mouth down to dry. He pulls the towel from his neck, wrings it with both hands until it drips less, and thinks more, then hangs it from a roof beam where a fresh breeze will explain the day to it. The watchman from the gate strolls over with his staff tucked like a parasol. He glances at the boat, at the sealed tubs, at the ledger's pebble, and at Jin's tidy array of tools. He does not need to say anything. Neither does Jen. They share a silence that counts as a report. The watchman takes a single scallion and the part most cooks trim off and chews it thoughtfully, paying in coin that cannot be put in a pouch. Attention. Jin shoulders the now light pole to walk home. The lane has changed key. Children try out their feet against stone, producing that particular rhythm of attention, and almost falling that mornings collect. A dog invents a purpose and sets off to pursue it. The clouds of earlier have become thin cloths, stretched for drying, no rain left in them, only memory. He passes a bathhouse where steam makes a soft flag in the doorway inside. Men will soak later, but now a woman beats towels against boards in a steady drum. She calls a greeting. He answers with the careful lift of the pole to show the pails are clean. Exchange is a language here, and grammar favors courtesy. At his own doorway, he sets the pole on its rest, the carved wooden fork that welcomes it like a chair welcomes a back. He tips the lantern to emptiness, then props it near the window, paper toward sun, frame toward shade. Tools, like people, do better when they dry without hurry. He aunties his warajis, squeezes them lightly, and places them upside down so their cords remember new shapes that won't argue later. Inside, a brazier keeps last night's ember honest. He adds a curl of charcoal from a small box, and breathes it into cooperation. A kettle makes its first polite sound. He rinses his hands with well water, not cold, not warm, the temperature of patient stone. He wipes fingers on the towel's dry corner, the corner he defended, then slices scallions into a bowl with miso, whisking both with a splash of the hot water, as if teaching them to agree. Rice waits under cloth, he lifts it, and the smell says the day may proceed. A child's voice turns over in a back room, and then sleeps again. His wife folds her robe, sits, and smiles in that morning way that is both greeting and inventory. He sets the daikon and mizuna on the table, the mustard leaves on top like a promise. Good quality, she says. He nods. No need to report on knots and rain and planks. The greens tell the story plainly. A gentle aside, if histories had more kitchens in them, many arguments would learn to speak more softly. Loops close not only at docks and ledgers, but at bowls. Gin stands in the doorway one moment more, letting the street step into itself. Far off, Mattis pole will send the boat out on the turn, past warehouses that have learned the word useful in every tense, toward fields that will read this morning's recipe with roots instead of eyes. The city, tidy in its own ways, will begin its louder senses. Jen's night sentence ends with a period shaped like a clean, drying pail. He's stopped the miso as content. The scallions taste of river talk, and ledger ink, and good habits. He sets the bowl down, rolls his shoulders once, and feels the exact weight of nothing on them. The lantern behind him accepts sun into its paper and becomes, for the length of a day, a quiet idea rather than a flame. And as the boat slides toward the patties and the market arranges its colors, let's step away from water and walls and rest in the shade of tall date palms, where an ancient reed pen waits on a low table to tell us its calm, patient story. Midday rests on the city like a warm hand. Walls of mud brick keep their promise to be cool inside and the color of baked bread outside. In the lane, palm shadows fall in straight stripes, as if someone has combed light with care. A doorway curtain of woven reed lifts a finger's width when the smallest breeze finds it, then settles again with the politeness of cloth that understands ours. Within, the scribe's hut is a steady room. Its floor remembers river silk pressed and dried. A low table sits near the wall, a square of wood rubbed smooth by wrists and small tools. On it waits a shallow bowl of water, a dish of fine clay wrapped in damp cloth, and a reed stalk cut to a narrow wedge. The reed lies diagonally on a folded scrap of linen, its tip a calm triangle. It knows the day, and the day knows when not to hurry. A gentle aside, in this old craft, letters do not flow with ink. Words are pressed into softness, wedge by wedge. Clay receives and keeps, like a listener with perfect recall, the stylus, made from a river plant that whispers in wind. Changes plant to sign with nothing more than angle and patience. Outside, donkeys doze with their harnessed bells quiet. A potter pushes a wheel without sound, only the slow circle of his hand same almost, but inside the scribe's room, the loudest voice belongs to shade. It fills corners with good temper. The plastered wall holds a shelf lined with tablets that have known sun and fire. Some are small, notes of grain or jars or names. Others are as large as both hands, full of lines that run like garden beds after a careful morning. A cylinder seal carved with tiny animals sleeps on a leather cord draped over a peg. Its images wait for damp clay to receive them, and carry them into days not yet lived. Near the table stands a jar with a narrow neck and a lid of clay set loose, so air can find its way without argument. Inside is more prepared clay, sifted and kneaded until grit gave up and left. The jar's mouth smells faintly of wet earth, and the kind of queen you notice only if you stop thinking. Beside it, a small basket of reeds holds future pens. Some are still green and want drying time. Some have been split, their ends cut on a slant, their tips sharpened with a flake of stone that lies nearby, wrapped in a bit of wool for safety. The scribe steps in from the lane carrying the weather on his shoulders. He is ordinary in the right ways. Sandals dusty, robe light and undecorated, hair tied in a simple string to keep it from asking questions while he works. He pauses just inside the door to let daylight choose its corner, then crosses to the water bowl and wets his fingers. Heat leaves the skin and decides to sit down quietly. He loosens the cloth from around the fine clay. It is cool, obedient, the consistency of bread though listening to its baker. From the jar he pinches a sphere the size of a small plum and rolls it gently on the table, flattening it with the heel of his hand until it becomes a tablet with rounded edges. He turns it twice to smooth each side. He draws the edge of the reed lightly across the surface, making no mark yet, only teaching the clay about what comes next. A boy from the household, the scribe's nephew, or perhaps a neighbor's child entrusted to the craft for an hour, steps in with a palm stick and a smile too large for silence. He places 3 damp pebbles on the table's corner. They had been sitting in a bowl by the door, keeping cool for the sake of small hands. He sets them in a neat line, as if that too were part of the profession. The scribe nods and points at the door curtain. The boy understands and lifts it higher with a stick so that moving air can visit, then wedges the stick into a notch. The room sighs and accepts the gift. A gentle aside. Apprentices learn first the manners of materials. Clay wants water but not too much. Reed wants sharpness but not harshness. Air wants to pass without being trapped. The hand that respects these wants will see fewer corrections and fewer broken corners. On a reed mat near the inner wall, a shallow tray holds thin cakes of dried clay, each with a scratch of charcoal naming its mix, some a little sandy for rough notes, some extremely fine for lines that must be exact. Today's work asks for the fine. The scribe lifts a cake, sets it in the water bowl only long enough to change its mind about dryness, and returns it to rest. He will use it later to patch a tablet's edge if it chips or to smooth away a sign that misbehaves. A visitor's shadow gathers at the doorway. It is the steward from a merchant's yard, face already telling of lists and measures. He holds a long clay envelope sealed at both ends, the surface rolled with the little procession of animals from the merchant's seal. Inside, there is a tablet that will stay hidden until it must speak, but on the outside the steward has asked for a summary in clean signs, sacks of barley promised to a boat, date and witness, the safe route by the canal rather than the open river this week. The scribe gestures to a stool. The steward perches with gratitude obvious in his shoulders. The reed returns to the scribe's hand. He holds it between thumb and first finger, the way one might hold a small bird that does not need to be persuaded, only guided. He sets the reed's cut face at its first angle and presses the wedge in, crisp and deliberate. A short wedge angled right becomes a number. A longer wedge becomes a word when lines gather into agreement. He breathes out as he presses. The stroke and the breath end together. The clay takes each mark without fuss, each sign shining wet for a heartbeat before becoming part of the tablet's plane. He pauses to moisten the reed tip on the water's surface. It is not ink he seeks, only cooperation. Then the next line begins. Between lines, he turns the tablet with both hands flat, the gesture careful as a farmer moving seedlings. He adds the steward's name, not with pride, not with scorn, simply as part of the day's grammar. The seal will speak later, for now the wedges carry the promise. From the courtyard comes the small percussion of a mortar and pestle. Someone crushes herbs for a stew or perhaps for a salve. A lizard accepts the wall's warmth and watches with a confidence shared by creatures who have found their place. The curtain breathes again. The reed answers with another wedge. When the summary is ready, the scribe reads it out in a low voice. It is not performance, it is a habit that lets the tongue catch what the eye might miss. The steward leans in, nodding at phrases the way one nods at familiar roads. The scribe fixes a single wedge that was shy, moistens the edge with a fingertip, and presses the corrected sign with courtesy. He sets the tablet on a board near the window slit, where air is brisk enough to dry it to firmness, but not so eager as to crack it. Later, when the sun is stronger, it will sit in a yard tray to finish. For work that needs to outlast forgetfulness, the kill off the alley will complete the promise. For notes that live only as long as the agreement does, shaded drying will do. The steward rises, leaves a flat loaf of gate bread on the stool as a thank you that the ledger will balance in the usual way, and steps back into the light that does not bother to argue. The scribe wraps the clay dish again, sets the reed to rest on its linen, and breathes with the room's coolness. The reed basket waits like a small, green choir. Each stalk carries joints at measured intervals, glossy and calm, hollow as flutes. The scribe lifts 3, turning them in his hands to find where skin meets strength. He listens with his thumb. A good stylus is chosen first by touch, then by sight. On the table, a knife of black stone rests in its wool sleeve. The blade is small and honest about its limits. He lays a reed across the table's edge and presses the knife down at a shallow angle, letting the plant yield rather than tear. The cut exposes a clean oval. He trims again, making a wedge, then pares one face slightly longer so the tip carries both edge and point. A final nip, deliberate as a breath, completes the triangle that clay understands. A gentle aside, the reed's triangle is not a sharp line for scratching. It is a stamp, a quiet foot that presses and lifts. The wedge is a footprint of thought. Its clarity depends on angle, pressure, and the promise of the next wedge beside it. He tests the tip on a practice tablet, a palm-sized square of fine clay that never leaves the room and never learns anyone's secrets. He holds the stylus with fingers loose, wrist level, arm weight shared with the table. He presses once to make a short, neat wedge. Then he turns the reed in his fingers, not the tablet, and presses again at a new tilt. The clay answers with a different character, same family, new direction. In this craft, rotation is a language. The boy returns with a small jar of water and sets it near the reed basket, careful not to invite a spill. The scribe slides the practice tablet toward him and points to a line scratched lightly across the top. For shapes, the gesture says, not the voice. The boy mimics the hand, press and release, each wedge leaning in the same direction like barley heads in a soft wind. The first is to deep and leaves a tiny ridge. The scribe shakes his head once, then coats a fingertip with a breath of water and smooths the mark away. The boy tries again. This time the clay keeps peace with itself. A reed dries fast when asked to do work. The scribe dips the new stylus briefly in the water jar and wipes the tip on linen. Not to make it wet, only to convince fibers to lie down together. He trims the second stylus a little stouter, suited for signs that want wide shoulders. The third he cuts slender, for small wedges in crowded lines. The three lie on the cloth like a family of tools that know their roles. At the room's edge stands a wooden frame with cords stretched across it. Tablets rest there while becoming ready. The steward's summary from earlier darkens as water escapes. It will hold shape now if moved with respect. The scribe checks its surface with the back of a fingernail. No shine, no stick. He moves it to a tray where air can visit both sides, then returns to the table for the day's lesson. He draws soft guidelines on a fresh tablet by pressing the flat of the stylus, not the tip. Lines hardly visible, enough to encourage order without scolding. Then he begins a column of numbers, ones, tens, 60s, those useful families that make storage and wages possible. Wedges count by being placed exactly where they should be, no more, no less. He reads them under his breath, like counting stones into a jar. A gentle aside, in this place many measures agree to speak in 60s. The system is older than any single quirk. It keeps peace between jars, ropes, fields, and days. Priests approve of it. Boatmen memorize it, scribes breathe it. The boy watches the column grow. He tries a line of his own, tongue peeking between lips in the way of busy children everywhere. His third wedge is timid, his fourth wanders. The scribe moves the boy's wrist back a finger width and adjusts the angle of the stylus so the flat side faces left rather than up. Sometimes signs misbehave because they were looking the wrong way. From the lane, a wheeled cart passes and leaves a thin stripe of sound. The curtain lifts and settles. Warm air means to be kind but forgets how. The scribe answers by placing a damp cloth over the jar of fine clay to keep it from dreaming into dryness. He lifts a small cake from the tray, this one labeled with a faint charcoal crescent, and crumbles a pinch into the water bowl to create slip. Slip attends to small repairs without argument. He opens a wooden box that lives in the wall niche. Inside are tablets from a sign list, old master's letters pressed long ago, used now as patterns. One shows 4 versions of a word for barley, each a cousin to the other. Time teaches even signs to change their shoes. He places the pattern tablet near the boy and points to the first line. The boy copies with slow, careful presses. The scribe lets him fill the line before correcting. Patience learned now will save 10 times the work later. The knife returns to duty. The fine, slender stylus needs a single shaving from one cheek to bring its edge back to honesty. He checks the bevel against light, then tests on the practice clay. The new wedge sits brighter, less muddled, like a thought that finally found its verbs. A neighbor peeks in, carrying a shallow basket of chaff for the family chickens. She waits until the scribe looks up, then sets a small handful of date pits on the stool, fuel for the brazier when the son forgets to help. He nods thanks. She withdraws without tugging at the lesson's thread. The boy glances after her, then returns his eyes to the tablet, as if afraid the wedges might move when ignored. A gentle aside, tools feed the room, neighbors feed the tools. A triangle of kindness holds many crafts upright materials and those who provide bread, water, and the small time between chores. The practice tablet now wears to neat rows of apprentice wedges. The scribe rotates it, demonstrates spacing between lines with the width of a reed, and draws a soft rule. He shows how to lift the stylus straight up rather than slide out, which would bruise the clay and make smudges where meaning should be. He lets the boy try. For presses, a pause to breathe. For more, play approves. He opens a small cloth pouch and takes out a tiny smooth pebble. It's not for writing, it is for listening. When a line finishes, he polishes the surface lightly, not to erase, but to calm the shine and make the next wedges sit without jealousy. The boy runs a finger behind the pebble, feeling the surface turn from damp to even. In the lane, he decides to rest on a bench. The donkey bells resume a patient chiming as someone leads the animal toward shade. The room smells briefly of baked earth as sunlight, stronger now, finds the wall. The scribe moves the lamp from its niche to a lower shelf so the clay does not think about drying too fast. He lines up the 3 new styli on the table's back edge, tips pointing left, to remind the hand of today's orientation. He scratches a tiny mark on each butt end 1 notch 2, 3 so finger memory can find the right tool without looking, even when the afternoon asks eyes to be lazy. When the boy's line ends, the scribe nods and sets the tablet on the drying frame. He pours a little water into the bowl, returns the knife to its wool, and presses his palms together as if closing a book. Afternoon leans into the lane with slow elbows. Heat has chosen its seat. The reed curtain rests higher on its prop, and the room breathes in long, even measures. The scribe lifts the new stylus family 1 notch 2, 3 and straightens them as if smoothing children's hair before visitors arrive. A soft knock. The steward returns with a second request. He places 2 small tablets on the table. One is a tally from the granary numbers stacked like orderly bricks. The other is a note for a boatman, asking that sacks meet the water by a certain hour when the canal's patience is best. The scribe reads both with his finger, line by line, letting touch keep pace with eyes. He nods. The steward's seals on the edges behave. The clay still holds the shine of very recent work. The scribe takes a pinch of fine clay from the jar and rolls it into a slender sausage between his palms. He lays it across the back of the granary tablet and folds the ends forward, making a small strap. He dampens it with the barest breath of water. Then, from the peg, he lifts the cylinder seal on its leather cord. It is a procession in miniature, a kneeling figure, a palm, a grazing goat, a sun disk that enjoys circles. He places the seal at one end of the strap and rolls it once, straight and steady. Images walk across the clay with dignified feet. The strap is now a seal. If someone breaks it, the tablet will admit it without argument. A gentle aside, seals are signatures that do not need ink or a hand that remembers. They travel well, they speak in pictures so any watcher, lettered or not, can understand and touched, opened. Agreed. He sets the granary tablet aside and shapes a larger shell of clay. Palms press and turn, making a thin layer that will wrap a second tablet like a careful skin. This is the envelope. He folds it over the boatman's message and smooths the seam with a wetted thumb until it forgets it was ever to pieces. On the outside he writes a short echo of what lies within names, date, the canal the way a potter writes a mark under a jar. Then he rolls the cylinder seal along the face, and the animal procession makes its second walk of the day. He rotates the envelope and rolls another band across the back so later hands can see that all sides agree. The boy watches with the reverence of someone attending a small ceremony. The scribe hands him a marble-sized bit of clay and nods toward the door latch. The boy pushes the door closed, loops the cord, and presses the clay over the knot. He fetches a tiny wooden token from the niche, the house seal carved with a simple barley head, and rolls it across the lump. The door is sealed in the house's simple way. If reopened, it will say so. He leaves it, proud of this quiet victory over air and habit. They make ready for errands. The scribe wraps to finished tablets in a leaf of reed mat for shade. He places them in a shallow basket padded with straw. The boy slides a folded linen over the top and tucks it under. Corners snug, the scribe lifts the basket and tests the weight against memory. Good, clay feels safe when it does not wobble. Out in the lane, Light steps gently on everything. They walk toward the granary, keeping to the shadow edges where walls have found their purpose. Donkey bells write a low, steady sentence. A water seller tips a skin and lets a little run to show the coolness inside. Somewhere, a baker's paddle slides a loaf deeper into heat. The granary gate is a big rectangle of wood that wears the sun without complaint. Just inside, a cool chamber opens, sweet with grain and straw. Measure rope hangs from a peg. The steward who works this room greets the scribe with a tilt of his head that says he has been expecting this level of calm. On a low platform sit two jars, nearly full, each with a clay tag tied to its neck. The tags already have marks pressed into them: lot, harvest, field edge reference, the season shorthand. The scribe sits on a small stool, places the basket by his foot, and draws the practice tablet from his sleeve. He carries one everywhere. He checks the jar tags, the numbers on the steward's list, and the shape of the rope measure. He counts in 60s, light as stepping stones. Each scoop sings the same, the rope falls to the same knot, the jar's shoulder rises at the same pace. The steward hums under his breath a work song with no words. The boy wedges a stick under the window shutter to improve the room's temper. When the measure agrees with the list, the scribe prepares a receipt. He pinches a tablet blank to size and sets the clay on his knee, which has learned the shape of this task. He writes 3 lines: quantity, keeper's name, destination. He adds the date with wedges that behave like a tiny calendar, and a witness signed, the steward's thumbprint pressed lightly beside the scribe's small personal notch. The boy brings the cylinder seal. The scribe rolls it along the bottom edge. The goat and palm take their measured walk. The steward brings a small lump of clay and ties it to the jar cord as a fresh tag. The scribe presses a short summary there, quick and tidy. The jar now wears its travel clothes. A gentle aside: some promises travel as tablets, some travel as tags. Both are play, both are specific. Clay prefers to be told the exact truth. They move next to the boat shed by the canal. Shade grows kindly here. A boatman sits mending a net, knots becoming a pattern his hands have recited for years. The scribe offers the enveloped tablet, the one with the canal summary outside and the sealed secret inside. The boatman turns at once, admiring the seal's parade. He runs a thumbnail along the seam to feel its honesty, then nods. He signs with his own mark to short parallel wedges he always uses and returns to his net with a pleased face that says he trusts the clay more than words. A messenger waits under a palm with a plated satchel at his side. He is lean in the way of people who live between doorways. The scribe hands him the sealed granary tablet, the boatman's envelope, and a small scrap broken from an old fired tablet with a fresh wedged note on it. The shirt is an errant stub, directions to a yard near the kiln, a simple drawing of a doorway pattern the messenger will recognize. Old writing gets a second life here, carrying small news on its strong back. He arranges the satchel with straw partitions so the tablets do not quarrel. He ties the flap and tests the weight with a shoulder that knows distances. No hurry. He will walk in the seam between sun and shadow until evening. Messages like modest weather travel best. As they return toward the scribe's hut, they pass household doors with clay lumps at the latch. Each bears its own small picture fish, star, sprout, simple crosshatch. The boy names them softly, Fish House, Sprout House. It pleases him to know a streak by its tiny gallery. A breeze from the river finds them and makes a brief promise about later. Back at the room, the steward's earlier summary has grown firm. The scribe tips it with 2 fingers and sets it in a tray that will go to the kiln. A neighbor woman will tend the firing this evening, patient with heat the way a potter is patient with argument. She will stack tablets on edge like roof tiles so the hot air can walk among them and make conversation. Broken bits from old accounts will line the floor to spread warmth and catch drips a soft bed for new words. He writes a small kiln list on a narrow tablet. 3 receipts, 1 envelope copy, 1 sign lesson from the boy. Yes, even practice sometimes takes fire. So effort becomes object, and the child understands time's respect. He rolls the house seal across the bottom. The barley head leaves its brief field. A gentle aside, fire turns soft minutes into hard memory. Some notes need only shade. Some deserve flame. Deciding which is also part of the craft. Light begins to round its edges. The scribe places the reed curtain lower, the room sighs with approval. He arranges the 3 styluses side by side, their notches easy to count in dimness. He sets the day's remaining clay under the damp cloth, smooth as a lake at evening, and lets his hand rest there a moment longer than necessary. Evening settles by degrees, like a reed mat lowered a finger at a time. The lane turns the color of cooled honey. The scribe gathers the day's small cargo, the tray of firm tablets, the kiln list with the barley head seal, and a pouch of broken already fired sherds to serve as patient helpers in the heat. The boy walks beside him, with a bundle of date pit cakes tied in netting. Fuel smells faintly sweet, the way fruit remembers summer. The kiln yard rests behind a low wall. A domed shape rises from hard earth, its mouth a dark, oval thought. Beside it, a table made from a door laid flat holds stacks of yesterday's work, warm to the hand though the sun has nearly forgotten itself. A potter's wife, keeper of this small volcano, greets them with a nod and wipes her hands on a square of linen that already knows soot. She speaks little during firing days. The kiln prefers calm conversation. A gentle aside, not every tablet meets flame. Some business lives well enough with shade, but clay that must resist time accounts, that cross seasons. Copies of words that guide other words, these go to the kiln. Fire is a stricter teacher than air. It fixes what is true and refuses to return it to river mud. They begin the laying. At the kiln's mouth, the woman arranges a bed of fired sherds like roof tiles. The scribe passes the new tablets one by one. She stands each on its narrow edge so the hot breath can walk between them. Edges face the draught, rounded corners do not touch. The boy hands in thin separators, little saddles made from old fragments, to keep surfaces from leaning and kissing in the glow. The scribe's kiln list sits nearby, a quiet clerk supervising the stacking. Down on the hearth, the first fire is timid. Dry reed, twig, a handful of dung cake kindles without arrogance. Smoke curls out, gray and curious. The kiln exhales it through a small hole high on the dome, pleased to be reminded of its work. The woman feeds the mouth with a slow hand. This is the gentle warming that coaxes out the last of water. Too quick, and steam would rush in panic and chip corners. The scribe watches with the patience of someone who has learned slowness from clay itself. As heat gathers, the new tablets lose their damp sheen. Their color shifts a shade lighter, like a thought clarified. The woman listens with her palm to the curve of the dome. A kiln speaks through skin warmth traveling, weight changing, a hum too low to be sound. The boy crouches and peers at the stacks through the mouth. His eyes fill with ember light. The scribe touches his shoulder, and the boy sits back, understanding that watching and staring are not the same. She adds a few date pits and a longer reed stem. The fire's voice deepens, not louder, just older. The kiln's draft pulls steady as a breath at rest. The dome top glows the color of apricots hidden in shade. This is the stage when clay forgets softness and learns a new word for itself. A gentle aside, some kilns breathe upward, some sideways. This one drinks air at the mouth and returns it through a small crown of vents. The path matters less than discipline. Even heat is kindness. Surprise is not. The scribe takes from his pouch a handful of very small sherds, each no bigger than a fingernail. He scatters them near the hottest place to keep the flame from licking only one spot. Broken writing becomes the peacemaker of new writing. The boy looks pleased by the justice of that. From time to time, the woman draws a tablet near the mouth with a hook stick and taps it lightly with a slender bone. Early in the firing, the sound is dull, like a hand on packed earth. Later, it grows clearer, a modest ring that says structure has changed its mind about water and made a different promise. She listens, nods, returns the tablet to its stand. The hook leaves no scar. Clay at this stage accepts small visits if the hand is polite. On a low bench, the jar of water waits capped with a shard. Nobody drinks here without moving away from flame. Habits are part of safety as much as courtesy. The scribe moistens his lips, then sits where the heat touches him but does not insist. He recites the kiln list quietly, eyes moving from line to stack. 3 receipts, 1 envelope copy, 1 student strip. The boy, hearing student, lifts his chin. His morning rows of angled wedges have earned a place in fire not because they will be needed long, but because a child deserves to hold proof that effort can become stone. Shadows lengthen into the yard. A neighbor arrives with brushwood in a rope sling and leaves it without talk. Another brings small tamarisk branches. Fuel is a village story. Each house contributes its slow twigs and saves scraps. Smoke rises in a slow ribbon, hardly more than a thought drawn in the air. The woman closes the kiln mouth part way with a brick and a tile, narrowing the opening so heat lingers. The fire changes voice again, a soft steady draw. She watches the top vents. Little heat mirages dance above them. The scribe recognizes this as the time when he can do nothing to hurry good results. He enjoys that helplessness. It feels like trust. A gentle aside, Heat writes a second text over the first. Where a thumb once left a print, fire leaves a color. Where a stylus pressed, fire strengthens that memory. You read the words. Fire reads the spaces between. Night opens. Stars appear like careful stitches in dark cloth. The kiln glows more inside than out. The boy nods where he sits, head inching toward his knee as if comparing shapes. The woman feeds a last measured armful of fuel, then lets the flame grow thoughtful. She will close the mouth soon and leave a little vent for the kiln to dream under its own blanket. The scribe stands and stretches without drama. He and the boy step to the side wall where finished tablets from earlier firings rest on a shelf. Some have been there for seasons, pale and sure of themselves. He picks up one at random and reads a single line: wages in barley for 2 men and a donkey, witnessed by a name the night no longer remembers. He taps it lightly with a fingernail. It answers with a small ring that cannot be erased by rain. He returns the tablet to the shelf and brushes away a little dust with his sleeve. Dust ash, memory. They all share a friendliness with flat places. The woman slides the brick fully into the mouth and leaves a slim breath gap. The kiln will cool. By its own slow choice, morning will bring answers. They walk home by a quieter lane. The boy carries the empty net that smells now of warm fruit stones. Crickets take charge of the night's bookkeeping. The scribe feels heat park gently on his forearms, a souvenir of patient work. At the curtain, he pauses and looks back in the direction of the kiln. He knows those stacks are learning their final firmness in the kind of silence that deserves respect. Inside, he places the styluses in their corner and spreads the damp cloth again over the bowl of fine clay. Even night air can be thirsty. He pinches the lamp wick down to a thread of flame, leaves it long enough to see the room choose its favorite shadows, then breathes it out. Morning unwraps the lane with pale cotton light. The kiln yard smells faintly of warm dust and date pits that finished their work in the night. The potter's wife has already opened the mouth and loosened the crown vents. Air moves through the dome with the manners of a guest. The scribe arrives with the boy, both carrying quiet faces suitable for meeting yesterday's words in their new form. They wait a little longer. Rushing a kiln is like waking a sleeper with a shout. It does no one favors. The woman slides a brick aside and looks in without leaning, palm at the brow to soften the glow. She nods once. Cooling has learned enough patience. A hooked stick draws the first tablet to the threshold. The scribe touches its edge. Warm, yes, but steady. He taps the corner with a fingernail. The answer is a small, clean note. The clay is no longer a river on pause. It has become its own decision. He lifts each tablet with the cloth-wrapped hands of someone greeting elders. The boy takes them, one by one, and lays them on a reed mat to sigh the last of their heat into morning. Marks look crisper now, as if fire trimmed them with a thread of light. The student strip sits shyly among them, narrow and earnest. The boy smiles at it the way gardeners smile at sprouts. A gentle aside, firing presses a second time stamp into the clay. The first was the wedge itself, the second is color and ring. Together they steady an account against floods, worms, and forgetfulness. They carry the days to home the straw-lined basket. The room greets them with its familiar cool. On the long wall, 3 shelves weight planks smoothed by years of sliding tablets and end out like short, quiet books. Each shelf has its family, daily tallies nearest hand, seasonal accounts above copies, and sign lists higher still where small fingers will not rearrange history by accident. The scribe begins with the receipts. He wipes each face with a soft, dry cloth to invite a matte comb and brush away kiln powder. He reads as he files, lips moving the way people move while counting stitches. Quantities meet names, names meet places, places meet seasons. He sets to similar tablets side by side and aligns their lower edges until the numbers make a respectful greeting across the seam. Then he stands them on edge leaners to their own kind, so air can walk between them. He writes tiny shelf tags on slivers of fire-shirred little labels with 2 or 3 signs and a wedge for the month. These he tucks under the front edge of each cluster. The tags can be moved without lifting the stack. The shelf keeps its memory even if the room does not. The boy watches, then imitates, carving a simple marker with the house's barley head and the line for kiln week. He presses it a bit too deep, but the shelf forgives. Near the door hangs a cord with small clay loops threaded on it. Each loop carries a mark for a class of account: grain, oil, rope, boat. When a group grows beyond easy glance, the scribe moves a loop to a peg by that shelf. The cord's missing ring tells him to look there first. Eyes learn the system until hands can find things in the dark. From the lane comes a polite rustle of sandals. A farmer waits with his hat in both hands the way people hold respectful silence. He has brought a question about last month's measure. The scribe nods to a stool. He takes down 2 tablets and a tag. He sets them on the table in a brief triangle, then points to the line they need. The farmer leans in with care, tracing wedges with a calloused finger until understanding stands up and stretches. They agree to add a small note about a day of rain lost to the threshing floor. The scribe presses a correction tablet with 3 lines and a seal, then files it beside the earlier pair. Not an erasure. A memory with a small bridge built after. A gentle aside. Here memory prefers addition to deletion. Clay loves layers more than it loves edits. It trusts a trail. By mid-morning the kiln list has been satisfied. The scribe folds it and slides it behind a beam, where such lists live until the week's chores gather themselves. The student strict gets a place of honor on the high shelf for now to dry its pride in a little sunlight that finds the room when the curtain lifts. Later, it will return to the basket of practice pieces. Some may crumble and become slip again. That is not loss. It is a loop. The boy sweeps the floor in long, unhurried arcs, encouraging ash, and reed bits into a corner pan. The sweepings go into a shallow jar. Later, the potter will mix some with clay to temper it. Soaked tablets learn a little more spine. The rest will help keep the brazier's temper in this room. Even dust volunteers. The scribe checks the roof beam where a thin line opens now and then in the dry season. Not yet. When it does, he will press a ribbon of clay into it, smooth the seam with a wetted finger, and leave a thumbprint like a small signature of maintenance. Clay repairs wood. Wood shelters clay. Trades lean on one another the way friends do when the year turns sharp. Rain is not near today, but he remembers the month when it will be. He shows the boy where the shelf planks ride on small baked feet instead of touching the walls full length. This lets air curtain the back and keeps damp from hugging the wood during the heavy weeks. He taps the feet with a knuckle. They answer with tiny rings like insects playing music. He opens a lidded jar and takes out 3 disc-shaped tokens fired, thick as to fingers. Each carries a hole near the edge and a sign on the face. They are the library's keys. When he or another clerk borrows a tablet for the day, a disc takes its place in the line strung on the front peg. The hole keeps the disc tethered. The sign tells anyone passing what moved and why. He ties one at an empty slot, then empties it and puts it back, letting the boy watch the small ceremony twice. Routines keep forgetfulness at arm's length. Noon slides by in a pale ribbon. Heat begins its afternoon recital. The scribe lowers the curtain to its patient notch. He trims a stylus cheek with 2 quick breaths of the knife, then lays all 3 new tools on the cloth next to their elders. The table looks briefly like a family portrait. Every tip wears its lifetime in tiny bevels. He sits and copies a short passage from a sign list onto a practice strip. The script is the day's quiet exercise for his own hand. Even masters rehearse. He presses wedges at an even pace, spacing them so eyes rest without tripping. He adds a small footnote sign in the margin, not to correct the old list, to remind himself how he solved a spacing trouble today. Tomorrow's self will be grateful. A gentle aside, notes to our future hands are a kindness. Clay keeps them simple. A small wedge in the margin, a notch on a tool, a tag at a shelf. Headwork is lightened by visible marks. Late light warms the wall like bread. The boy, drowsy from useful work, leans against the doorpost, the sweet brush across his knees. The scribe rises and glances along the shelves one more time. Lines look level. Tags sit where they should. The room holds the day the way a jar holds steady water. He takes the kiln list from the beam, rolls it, ties it with a thread, and sets it in the niche where finished lists retire like teachers who still live next door. Outside, the lane gathers the first soft steps of evening. The donkey bells remember tune and play only half of it. The scribe lifts the damp cloth, checks the fine clay, covers it again like tucking a child. He pinches the lamp wick longer, but leaves it unlit. There is still enough day to read the room's silence. The night is not black here. It is a soft gray, the kind of gray that remembers snow. Stone keeps the cold like an old duty, and the winter air lies close to the ground. In the monastery kitchen, a door curtain of thick wool sighs as it moves. Beyond it, beyond the cloister walk, the church waits with a deeper hush. Matins is near, but not yet. There is a pause in which breath shows itself, and then disappears. 2 figures arrive the way quiet arrives. They are lay brothers, the sort of workers who speak more with their hands than their tongues. Their wool hoods sit low, their cheeks share the same weather. One carries a bundle of split ash wood. The other holds a small iron lantern that makes a modest circle of yellow on the flagstones. The lantern does not hurry. The circle moves with them across the floor, over straw that has been scattered thinly to keep the stones from sweating. They kneel by the hearth, which sleeps under a dome of its own ash. The lantern sets down on the iron trivet. A hand reaches for the poker. The crust of last night's fire lifts like a lid. Under it a faint red survives, a memory that did not forget its job. The bellows hang from a peg. The leather creaks once, twice, 3 times. A small tongue of orange answers. It tests the air, then lengthens. The wood bundle opens its palm to the flame. Heat puts its shoulder to the room. A gentle aside. In houses like this, heat is a craft. Fire is not a fountain to be turned on. It is a person you greet. You ask softly. You do not demand. At the long table sits a trough. It is oak, polished by years of the same movement. Inside, a pale mass rests. The dough has spent the night under woolen cloths, and a light skin of flour breathing its tiny breath. A clay jar stands nearby with yesterday's saved leaven, the starter that keeps the line of loaves unbroken, barm rescued from ale, lifted day by day into bread. The room smells like grain and smoke, with a little sourness that promises sweetness later. The elder brother Kitchener for this month washes his hands in a wooden bowl of cold well water, then warms them near the new fire. He does it without thinking. The body remembers work faster than words can instruct it. He peels back the cloths and looks at the dough. It has risen modestly in the cold. Not proud, but awake. He turns at once with both hands, folding each side toward the center, then presses the heel of his palm in a slow rhythm. The dough answers. It sighs and reshapes, and learns to hold itself. On a shelf a set of scales waits. Beside it, wooden weights, 1, 2, 4, and a thicker one that remembers feast days. Ration loaves will need to be even. The brothers will each have their share at the midday meal, and the poor at the gate will receive theirs later with a blessing spoken low. He pinches off a test piece and weighs it. He adds a little, removes a little, until the balance's tongue stands straight. He nods. Today's hand knows today's measure. A second gentle aside. Bread here's not show. It is the day's floor. Peas and broth will walk on it, cheese will sit on it, words will rest beside it in the refectory while someone reads aloud. Slowly, the way rain reads a roof. The other brother baker's helper this week checks the oven. It is a beehive of brick tucked into the far wall, with a mouth that can take a wooden peel, and a little side door to guess at temperature by hand rather than number. He slides a palm near the brick and learns what he needs. Not yet hot enough for bread, but warm enough for a dose of small loaves. The little rounds for the infirmary, gentler crusts for tired teeth. He sets the first batch near the mouth to keep them cozy without rushing them. He lines up the peels, a long one, a short one, and one stubby as a paddle with their handles all pointing the same way. The habit means no one reaches into a tangle when the heat grows serious. A crock of salt waits in the corner, wrapped in linen against damp. A sack of barley leans against the leg of the table, its top knotted with a simple loop that can be managed even with cold fingers. The quern sits under another table, its stone surfaces wearing a shallow smile from many turnings. It is not needed yet. Today's flour was milled yesterday, ground by the water wheel that speaks in the yard. But the quern stays close, the way a friend stays, in case weather or will misbehaves. From outside, a small sound climbs the wall, the first bell of the night office tested with a light pull. The sound is round and calm. It is not a call yet. It is a reminder to the bell rope and the hand that owns it that their work is near. The lantern listens. The fire listens. The men keep working. Brother Kitchener pinches and weighs. Pinch and weigh, each portion smoothed into a ball with the side of his hand, then rolled under his palm, until the surface tightens like a thoughtful brow. The helper dusts the boards with flour and sets the rounds in even rows. The board edges carry a low rail to keep loaves from wandering. The tops receive a quick mark from the back of a knife, not deep, just enough to guide the crust later, and also to serve as a small signature. Today a single slash, tomorrow perhaps a cross. The next day a leaf. Marks help when the shelves fill. Marks please the eye when the day is long. A pot sits on a trivet at the edge of the hearth. In it, water cozies into warmth for hand washing after Matins. It will be carried to the church porch with a towel folded into an obedient square. Another pot holds leeks and a fist of barley for the simple broth that will greet the brothers after lauds. The broth does not rush either. It learns flavor from time, not fire alone. A gentle aside, silence is not emptiness here. It is full of small work. It keeps company with steam, with the scratch of a broom, with the soft thud of dough on wood. The helper opens the storeroom hatch and brings out a cheese wrapped in cloth, and a small jar of last summer's honey, dark as cooked wood. Not for now, for a feast 2 days hence. He sets them on a high shelf where the stone stays even and mice cannot vote. He makes a note on a wax tablet with a blunt stylus. Cheese moved, honey checked, firewood low. The tablet will live in his sleeve pocket until prime, then be copied in a steadier hand into the kitchener's book. They work by lantern, and by the first faint inch of dawn that finds the high window. Their breaths make momentary ghosts. When the dough balls number what the refectory benches require, Brother Kitchener covers them with a cloth to rest. He moves to the corner where the ashes sleep, and collects yesterday's fine ash into a jar marked with a set fingerprint. Ash will scour pots later. It makes a soft soap with water and patience. He sifts it with a wicker sieve that has known many mornings. A soft bell now to gentle notes ride the cloister. Matins gathers itself. The brothers look at the oven one more time, feed the fire its measured wood, and straighten the peels so a sleepy hand will not stumble. The lantern is lifted. The door curtain sighs again as they leave. The kitchen keeps breathing. Loaves rest. The broth thinks. The fire holds its center. The church receives them the way a great coat receives a chill morning, closing gently, keeping breath close. Stone arches rise like careful eyebrows. Lamps hang in small constellations, each wick trend to the size of the hour. Voices begin not as sound but as posture, backs straighten, heads bow, hands find their folded home. Then the office starts, syllable by syllable, like walking on fresh snow. Brother Kitchener and his helper stand near the back, where workers usually keep their listening. The chant carries its long line across the dark like a thread pulled slowly through cloth. It does not hurry and it does not falter. Psalms read the hour. The men breathe with them. In kitchens, time is often counted by recipes. Here time is counted by verses. Both keep a calm pace and disapprove of fuss. A gentle aside, in the night office, you do not sing at the fire, you let the fire sing at you. Even when hands are busy later, the psalms remain steady as heartbeat, reminding each task to make a clean shape and then rest. When the office finishes its arc responsory, reading prayer, the brothers dip fingers in the little basin at the porch. The water is just warm, like the inside of a mitt. Someone remembered to bring it, and someone will remember to fetch it back. That is how houses keep their grace. The kitchen pair move silently along the cloister, lantern in one hand, sleeves gathered out of the way in the other. Their sandals find the old steps without looking. The kitchen welcomes them with that low murmur room makes when heat and cool have agreed to share space. The covered rounds on the boards have relaxed a bit, edges soften, tops pillow. The oven answers a palm near its mouth with a steady, even breath. Brother Kitchener checks it the way his teacher showed him long ago. He tosses a pinch of flour onto the hearthstone. It colors at once and turns the shade of toasted linen, not black, not pale. The oven is ready to receive, not eager to scorch. He removes the cloths and makes the day's small sign on each dough with the knife tip. Today he chooses a simple diagonal. Tomorrow might be a cross or a sprig. He mutters the numbers in a whisper that is half counting, half blessing. The helper dusts the peel and lifts the first round with a motion that has no corners. The board slides, the loaf glides, the hearth accepts. One by one, a quiet procession of loaves enters the domed warmth. The peel glints dull in lantern light. The helper turns each loaf with a short, practiced wrist. Soaked seams point toward the dome and can open neatly in heat. Brother Kitchener places a small, earthen cup of water near the mouth to coax a modest steam. Cross will thank him later. They leave a gap near the opening for the little infirmary rounds. Those will go in last and come out first, their tender crusts kinder to tired teeth. The oven door becomes a polite mouth again, closed with its wooden shutter and rim of dampened cloth to soften the joint. Heat begins its unthreaded counting. On the hearth, the pot of barley and leeks resumes its conversation with bubbles. It never boils in a hurry. The proverb on the wall says as much in a line of paint faded by steam. Quick fires bruise flavor. Someone once added a small wedge under that line, a mark from a long-ago hand, as if to nod. Brother Kitchener stirs with the handle of a wooden spoon that has known many broths. He salutes salt with a pinch, sprinkles in a shred of dried marjoram saved from autumn, and lays the spoon across the pot like a bridge. The helper sets out the morning's tools, to trenchers for tasting, a ladle with its lip unchipped, a stack of cloths folded like patient birds. He brings the ash jar and a small bowl, mixes a paste with warm water, and rubs the soot from last night's kettles to a pale sheen. Ash cleans without complaint. He works in circular strokes that slow the mind and steady the breath. A gentle aside. Kitchens teach a kind of reading that has no letters, reading of heat against skin, of dough under the palm, of steam against the face, of sound in the pot. This literacy improves with age and prefers silence. Brother Kitchener listens at the oven, not with his ear, but with the flat of his hand laid just to the side of the mouth. The dome hums softly, a tone only hands hear. He waits the amount of time it takes to recite one psalm in his head, then two. He opens, turns, closes 3 motions as tidy as folding a towel. The loaves have lifted their shoulders. Scores bloom slightly. The color deepens toward hazel. He nods and moves a few from the back to the front, from the front to the side. Evenness is kindness, in bread as in judgment. The infirmary rounds come out first. He settles them on a board, covers them with a cloth so their crust does not harden too quickly at the edge. He will carry them later to the sister in charge, who speaks in a voice that makes rooms lower their own volume. Bread travels lightly through such a voice. At the long table, the helper measures out a small bowl of cracked oats for a thin porridge the novices prefer. He adds water, a fingertip of salt, and places the pot where heat is more suggestion than insistence. A younger stomach works better when not surprised. He scrapes yesterday's cheese board with a blunt knife, saving the clean shavings in a tiny crock to melt over the novice's portion later. Nothing of good flavor is asked to leave the house. Snow decides to try the air and then forgets, leaving only a thought of itself at the high window. Draft teases the lantern. Brother Kitchener shifts the flame to a niche out of the breeze. He checks the oven again. The larger loaves are near their finish. He draws two out to listen. A tap on the underside gives a hollow note like a small drum far away. He smiles, the kind of smile that shows in the eyes, not the mouth. He sets the first pair on the cooling shelf planks with space between them to let steam climb and walk away. The room fills with the smell that teaches patience to everyone in reach. Crust crackles quiet remarks as it settles. The helper sniffs, then refuses to look too happy. Joe can wait until the blessing. On a side table, a wax tablet records the day's basic numbers. So many loaves for the refectory, so many for the infirmary, so many for the gate. A short line reminds them to set aside 2 for travelers if the porter knocks at Tears with a request. The stylus leaves a blunt trail that will be copied later into the kitchen book by a steadier hand. They taste the barley leek broth with wooden spoons, blow softly. Sip. It is clean green and a little sweet from the grain. A pinch more salt, a breath of last summer's dried savory rub between finger and thumb, and the flavor sits down properly in the bowl. The helper ladles some into a smaller pot destined for a brother whose stomach prefers fewer herbs. Hospitality begins with knowing who eats how. The oven yields the rest of the loaves. Each comes out with its own small character, a seam that opened a little more, a corner that browned a shade deeper. Brother Kitchener arranges them by twins, this one beside its sibling, so distribution will feel fair to eyes that notice such things. He keeps 2 end pieces in mind for the kitchen workers. Custom permits small rewards when heat has kept your company before dawn. He rakes the hearth lightly, moves embers to a corner where they can glow against the next task, and sets a blackened kettle on a trivet to warm water for washing boards. A small clatter at the outer door says the porter has begun his rounds. The world outside the cloister sleeve wakes a little. The brothers fold the cloths back over the cooling bread and stand a moment in that good scent. It sits in the chest the way a quiet song sits in the head. The helper breathes in, then lets out a long thread of air, as if thanking wheat itself for growing where the monastery's fence meets the field. Lauds folds itself shut like a book whose page is marked with a ribbon of steam. The brothers file from the church with soft sandals and softer breath. In the refectory, benches wait like well-behaved lines of trees. The reader climbs to his lectern, opens the day's volume, and finds the place with a finger that knows the margin. Silence is not empty here, it is an attentive plate. Brother Kitchener carries in the kettle of barley and leeks. The handle is wrapped with cloth against heat, tied with a simple knot that undoes itself in one pull. He pours by steady arcs into a row of earthen bowls, each bowl with a lip wide enough for cooling. The helper follows with a smaller pot set aside for the brother whose stomach dislikes herbs, adding only a whisper of salt. A third bowl, thin and pale, belongs to an elder who eats slowly. The ladle's rhythm becomes a metronome. The reader begins his paragraph. The sound of wooden spoons meeting pottery joins the reading without interrupting it. A gentle aside. Meals taken in quiet do not erase pleasure. They spread it thin, so it covers more ground. The bread boards come next. Cooling loaves have lost their first steam and gained poise. Brother Kitchener lifts one, holds it upside down in one palm, and taps its base with two fingers. A hollow note says it is ready to be trusted with a knife. The kitchen uses a ration board with faint grooves worn by years of even cuts. The long knife keeps a simple edge, no serrations to bruise the crumb. He aligns the loaf's mark with the board's first groove, then guides the blade in a single confident stroke. Slices fall with their own clean weight. He counts without voice, one for each place along the benches, plus two ends kept back for kitchen hands, plus one for the reader who will eat later, after the book has closed. The helper lays slices like overlapping tiles on a tray lined with linen. Crumbs remain on the board like small snow. He gathers them with the flat of the knife and tips them into a jar for tomorrow's potages. In this house, even fragment and flake have future work. Fairness here is a craft. Some loaves are barley-rich and dark, others lighter with wheat when stores allow. Brother Kitchener alternates the boards so benches see both, not all of one kind at one table. He places a slightly larger slice at the start of each row and a slightly smaller one at the end, knowing that hands come in many sizes but appetites can stand modesty. On feast days the slices widen, on fasts they narrow. The grooves on the board remind his hand of the calendar. He checks the wax tablet. Today -50 for ration slices, infirmary 8 soft rounds, gate bread 10 coarse halves. He smooths the wax near a smudged note with the heel of his thumb and writes again more clearly. He ties a little string around the stylus as a tether. Things that live in pockets sometimes decide to go elsewhere. The porter appears at the kitchen door with his basket and his calm. He keeps the gate and the weather outside the threshold, both equally cool. He offers a nod and receives one. Brother Kitchener lifts the cloth from a tray of coarse bread reserved for the poor, thicker with barley and a touch of oat, strong and crumb, stamped with a small will mark so no one confuses it with the refectory's ration. He adds two small pots with warm broth, lids tied crosswise. The porter places a wooden token on the table in exchange, carved with a gate sign and today's notch. The token hangs on a peg by the door, a simple memory aid. When the basket returns empty, the token will move back to the cord, and the day will have one less thing to remember. A gentle aside, tokens and pegs do not replace minds. They hold corners so thoughts can sit without sliding. Slices travel to the refectory under a veil of cloth. Two brothers carry, hands steady, eyes lowered out of habit more than rule. They return with empty trays and a brief drift of warmer air, flavored by many breaths, and the never-rushed voice of the reader. Kitchen work continues while pages turn. The infirmarian's sister arrives with her own basket, lined with a cloth embroidered with a thin line of leaves, the only ornament the ward allows. Brother Kitchener offers the soft rounds first, cooled just enough to be kind. He shows her the loaf with a corner kept back as crumbs for a patient who must soak bread in warm milk. She counts quietly, lips moving in agreement with the numbers in her head, and ties a loop of string around one handle as her memory token. She thanks them in that low voice that rooms obey. Back at the hearth, the helper tends to the pots that brought broth and water to the morning. He stirs a paste of ash and warm water in a shallow bowl, dips a cloth, and circles the iron skin with patient wrists. The black gives way to a sober gray. He rinses with a handful of hot water and hangs cloths to steam dry on a line above the warm corner of the hearth. Damp linens like this will be ironed later, and are a flat stone warmed by coals, the kind of smoothing that pleases both eye and hand. On a side bench sits the bread chest, a low, deep coffer with a lid that closes softly. Inside, slats hold loaves off the bottom so air can pass, and sprigs of dried rosemary nestle in the corners as polite discouragement to mice. Brother Kitchener sets aside 2 loaves here, marked with a small wedge cut from the heel tomorrow's first ration, in case weather closes the path to the mill. The wedge makes the loaf unmistakable without taking it apart. The reader's voice enters the kitchen in fragments as doors open and close. A phrase about patience arrives with a draft and leaves again. The helper smiles without showing teeth. Patience has many kitchens. Brother Kitchener checks his wheat stones. He clicks them together lightly, listening for the familiar knock that says none has cracked. He counts them back onto the scale, 1, 1, 2, 4. He polishes the beam with a cloth that already knows the motion. He keeps a small pouch of fennel seeds in a drawer. 1 or 2 in his mouth settle the breath when onions or steam want to claim it. He offers 1 to the helper, who accepts as if accepting counsel. The porter returns. His basket is empty, the token in his hand. 10 halves went where they were meant to go, plus 1 for a child who appeared with a sleepy face and a mitten missing its partner. The porter shrugs the small story, as if reporting weather. Brother Kitchener nods and adds a dot to the wax. 11 given, 1 extra for small hands. He will balance that dot at supper by trimming a slice here or there, or by asking the brewmaster for a ladle more small beer for the gate tomorrow. Fairness is not a tightrope. It is a road you regrade a little each day. A gentle aside. When food is counted, kindness is also counted. The 2 tallies share a pencil. The refectory empties quietly. Trays return with crumbs, bowls with a shallow glaze of broth. The helper stacks bowls with a twist so rins do not chip. He fills the washing tub with hot water and a pinch of ash. The foam is modest and effective. Wooden spoons sit a moment in the mild bath, then rise renewed to their pegs. The draining board tilts toward a small gutter that returns used water to the garden barrel. Winter let us appreciate even this thin blessing. They set aside 2 and crusts for themselves. When no one is watching, workers may eat standing, not from greed but from habit. They dip the crust in the last of the broth, and agree without saying words that warmth has a simple taste worth learning again each day. Brother Kitchener checks the oven's belly. Embers fall into a neat sleep when he rakes them. He spreads a layer of ash to keep tomorrow's charm alive and sets the bellows aside with their mouth closed. Like a yawn finished, he looks once more at the shelves, the chest, the tablet. The peg token returned. The room makes a quiet shape of the morning. Prime rings like a small bell set inside a mitten. The light outside is a milk color, patient with clouds. Work in the church loosens the spine, work in the kitchen loosens the hands. Brother Kitchener and his helper return to a room that now smells of cooling crust, warm stone, and the green breath of leaks. Morning steadies itself. Repairs come first, not because anything is broken loudly, but because small care keeps big mending away. The long wooden peel has a thin whisper of a split near the blade. Brother Kitchener heats a little glue made from last year's scraps of hide over the back of the hearth where warmth is generous, but not bossy. He opens the split as gently as someone reading a secret, paints in the warm glue with a goose quill, and presses the sides together. A strip of linen dipped in the same glue winds around the spot in a soft bandage. The peel stands upright to dry, its handle resting in a notch carved for that very purpose, so wood will not learn a bend while it heals. A gentle aside, tools are like songs. Use keeps them honest, attention keeps them in tune. The quern gets its turn. Its handle has worked loose at the joint where peg meets wood. The helper shaves a thin sliver from a scrap of oak no thicker than a fingernail and taps it into the joint until the wobble becomes quiet. He rubs a smear of tallow along the spindle so stone turns without complaint. He wipes away the extra with a cloth he keeps only for grease, a cloth that remembers the shape of the spindle better than any eye. On a bench, the wicker sieve shows a gap where a rush has given up. The helper mends it with a length of soaked willow, weaving new over old, following the old pattern the way a finger follows a rosary. He holds the repair to the window and looks at the sift of light. Even holes make even flour. He nods, sets the sieve to dry, and puts the willow ends back into the bucket so they keep their softness for the next thing that asks. The oven door gets a new ribbon of clay at its edge where heat has made the old one crumbly. Brother Kitchener mixes clay with a fist of clean ash and a sip of water to make a paste that obeys. He presses it into the seam, smooths it with a wet finger, and pats the surface with the flat of his hand. The door sits ajar while the clay thinks about becoming a better door. The oven, now resting, returns a slow breath like a sleeper who has moved to the other side. Between prime and terse, the herb room becomes a small season of its own. It is not far, a still, cool space off the kitchen, with shelves that hold summer in jars. Labels in a steady hand say thyme, savory, rosemary, sage, and others more modest, marigold petals for color, plantain for small burns, mint for tight throats. Brother Kitchener loosens the string on a bundle of thyme. The stems crackle softly as he slides the leaves off into a wooden bowl, leaving the twigs clean. He will add a pinch to today's noon pottage so flavor can say hello without shouting. He checks the rosemary corners in the bread chest and renews a sprig. A small branch goes into a jar of coarse salt. The jar will sit 2 days and then give its scent to the salt the way a candle gives its light to a wick. The helper grinds a handful of dried savory in the mortar slow circles that lean more on weight than speed. The pestle stone has been held by many hands and remembers them all. When the leaves are small as sand, he tips them into a paper cone made from last year's account page. Nothing in this room scolds paper for having a second life. A gentle aside, dried herbs are stored weather. In winter, they remind the tongue how gardens sound. They set a small pan on the back of the hearth to melt a thumb of beeswax with a spoon of tallow. When the blend is clear and the smell is sweet, the helper stirs in a pinch of powdered plantain. A simple salve becomes itself. The ointment will live in a tiny ceramic pot with a cork that fits like a good thought. It is not for sale or show. It waits for kitchen burns, for chapped hands, for the nick a knife makes when a mind forgets to be where the hand is. Lists come next. Quiet math makes food walk as far as it needs. Brother Kitchener opens the kitchen book, thick paper, stitched with care, its pages ruled with lines that tilt like careful fields on a hillside. He writes today's date with a stub of ink stick rubbed against water, then notes what the morning used and what the shelves promise. Wheat flour, 1.5 sacks. Barley, 3 sacks less 1 bowl. Oats, good for a week if nobody sneezes too much. He marks a small star beside salt. The crock is lower than it looks. He will tell the seller to speak kindly to the salter tomorrow. A line for onions gets a dot. The braids hanging from the beam are thinning. Another line forward gets 2 dots. Winter asks and asks. He turns to a page titled Fasts and Feasts, where the months are a ladder. A small notation reminds him that the vigil of a saint approaches. On that night supper will be simpler and earlier at noon. The bread slices will be narrower by a finger's thickness. He draws a light pencil mark on the ration board's edge so his hand will remember to listen to the calendar without making the eye do all the work. He writes a note for the brewhouse, small beer, 1 cask to the gate on vigil, warm if possible. Then another for the porter, 2 extra halves, early weather may turn. The notes will travel by hand and by nod. This is how errands keep their humility. The helper takes the knives to the stone. He sprinkles water on the whetstone until it shines like a small pond. He draws the blade along the surface in even strokes, counting in the head rather than the mouth. 8 on one side, 8 on the other, then fewer, then fewest, then a light kiss to finish. The sound is a steady hush, like someone sweeping far away. He tests the edge not on his thumb but on a strip of old linen. A clean cut means enough. He rubs a breath of oil on the blade and returns it to its peg, handle pointing down so curious hands will not find it too quickly. Boards are scrubbed with warm water and a pinch of ash. Brother Kitchener keeps a little jug of sour vinegar for the final rinse made from wine that turned the way weather turns. He pours just enough to make the room remember apples. The rinsed boards lean to dry in a row that looks like a modest fence. The helper takes a lump of beeswax, soft from the hearth's nearness, and rubs it into the handles of tools, peels, spoons, the quern handle until the grain nods. Waxed wood tells the hand, I am ready again. A gentle aside, clean is not shiny here. Clean is friendly. At the window, a clay pot of thyme has kept a thin green courage through the cold. Or it might be savory, names swap in winter when leaves grow small. The helper pinches back to sprigs so the plant will thicken when spring returns, and sets the little clippings in the broth pot to rehearse their work. He opens the shutter for a moment. The air that visits is honest. He closes it before honesty becomes rudeness. The cellar steps in long enough to exchange his quiet weather with the kitchen's warm weather. He brings a ledger with ropes of numbers and a smile that belongs to a man who likes ropes. Brother Kitchener points at the star by salt and the dots by wood. The seller nods and draws his own small signs. They agree on tomorrow's cart to the mill if the road cooperates, on sharing a bundle of kindling with the infirmary if the cooper's shop has extra shavings, and on the piece of old sailcloth the kitchen would be glad to adopt as a cover for flour and damp. The seller goes out, carrying with him a slice and wrapped in linen. Numbers travel better with something to greet them. Terce is near, the bell's rope is already thinking about it. The kitchen makes itself ready to pause. Tools return to their hooks. Cloths fold into their simple squares. The book closes on its ribbon. The oven door, with its new clay edge, receives a careful hand and a pat, like a calm animal told it has done well. Terse sounds like a thin thread tugged gently through cloth. The kitchen receives the note, nods, and resumes its breath. Outside, The day is pale and settled, snow pauses, undecided, inside. Work chooses its next shape. Brother Kitchener pulls the barley jar forward, then stops his hand halfway and takes the dried tea crock instead. He tips a cupful into a sieve and rinses them in warm water until the cloudiness clears. Peas mean a thicker noon, the kind that feels like a blanket. He sets them to simmer with a heel of onion, to bay leaves tucked under the surface, and a bone saved from earlier in the week to lend comfort without pride. Heat is modest, like a conversation between old friends. Carrots and a turnip wait in the bin, skins dull with soil that remembers the garden. The helper scrubs them in a basin set near the window where light is kinder, then strokes the knife through their length in slow, even sticks. He keeps the scraps peels, ends a leaf that went quiet and tips them into a small pot to become afternoon broth for anyone who knocks late and cold. Nothing bitter goes in. Bitterness belongs to stories, not food. On the back of the hearth, a griddle stone warms for oat cakes. The helper mixes oats with a sip of small beer, a pinch of salt, and a thumb of melted drippings. The dough is shy and crumbly at first, and then agrees. He presses it into rounds with a wet palm and a wooden ring that keeps edges tidy. The rounds go to the stone, which greets them with a soft hiss like snow meeting the sleeve. No hurry. He will flip when scent, not clock, tells him. A gentle aside, kitchens measure with noses as much as with weights. Brother Kitchener checks the salt crock after his morning star in the ledger. It is low but not worrying. He pinches some into his hand and crumbles it between finger and thumb before it meets the pot. Salt that meets a cook's skin briefly seems to remember how to be kind. He adds a handful of barley to the peas. Thick plus smooth makes a good path for bread. A piece of dried apple, chopped fine, enters at the margin to offer quiet sweetness that no one can name unless they look for it. Steam rises and coats the window. The helper draws a little heart on the fog with a clean finger and wipes it away, smiling at his own mischief. He lifts the oatcakes and leans them against a folded cloth so their edges stay crisp instead of sulking. The griddle stone will bake a second batch for the woodyard if the sower passes by. The saw speaks to the bell in its own rhythm. They make a treat the monastery would not call a treat. Two end crusts brushed with warmed honey and a breath of rosemary smoke. Brother Kitchener curls a sprig on the embers until it perfumes, then holds the crust above the scent for a heartbeat. The honey takes the whisper and stands straighter. These will go to the laundry, where hands live in cold water and deserve brief sweetness when no one is counting. He skins the pea pot gently. Foam leaves, peace remains. He adds the cut carrots and turnip, a scrap of celery leaf, a spoon of dried savory, and a little vinegar from the sour jug to brighten the middle of the taste. Vinegar has a way of opening a room without letting in wind. He tastes, eyes closed, and nods. The helper tastes from a different spoon. Agreement has two spoons here. They exchange a fennel seed like a small handshake. The refectory messenger arrives novice, red-eared, careful with his footing. He carries a wooden tally that says how many bowls who need soft bread, and whether the reader will take warm water for his throat. Today the tally asks for an extra bowl for a guest in the prior's care. A traveler happened to the door with a pack that sounded like stones. Brother Kitchener adds a mark on the wax tablet and stirs the pot in a circle that includes strangers in its geometry. Bread slices rest under clean linen, the crusts now speaking in little clicks as they finish their settling. He lifts the cloth and sets aside the slices that broke. Broken bread is perfect bread for soup. He makes a tray of sippets, small pieces that float and soften, and hides a smile because he knows novices love the way they sink and then ask to be rescued by spoons. The helper warms a jug of small beer near the coals, not to boil, only to take the chill out. He wraps its neck with a cloth so the jug will not complain about hands. He sets tin mugs in a row and checks their rims. He remembers to tuck two cloves into the jug for scent. The beer will carry winter without arguing. A gentle aside. Heat changes liquid, but it changes faces faster. The bell for noon has not rung, but the kitchen can hear it already in the way shadows lie on the floor. Brother Kitchener wipes the ladle with a clean cloth and dips, counting bowls in unhurried swings. The helper follows, laying a sippet or two in each, and then a thin line of oil across the surface where light can catch. It is not strict extravagance, it is encouragement. Trays lift. Footsteps leave. The kitchen stands still for a tiny breath after the carrying leaves it. Rooms deserve a pause the way chests deserve a sigh. Then the other errands resume. The porter returns with empty tokens and full news. The child with the missing mitten came back with the mitten, triumphal as a saint. He received a slice and as reward from someone at the gate who saves ends for small victories. Brother Kitchener listens and marks nothing. Some notes live best only inside. The laundry girls slip in with rough aprons and quick whispers. They accept the honeyed crusts with a practiced gratitude that does not make a performance of itself. One tucks her share into her sleeve to eat by the steaming tubs where warmth will meet it again. The helper hands them a pair of spare cloths from the linen shelf, and they trade back a bundle of clean rags rolled tight for the kitchen's drawer. Trade is a kind of conversation when coins stay asleep. Midday settles. The refectory sends back trays with bowls licked clean enough to wash with thoughts. The reader's cup returns scented with mint. A novice brings the empty jug and thanks the clove as if it were a guest. The helper soaks the bowls in water that fogs a little. Steam meets the window and draws a new cloud. He leaves it alone. He wipes the tables with a cloth that knows to leave the wood's grain as it found it. Brother Kitchener banks the hearth for a while. Embers nudge together like friends leaning shoulder to shoulder. He slides a flat stone over the warm edge so the next dough, if any arrives, will have a calm step to stand on. He sets the bellows with their mouths closed. The oven door gets another friendly pat. Tools return to their places, handles downward, blades toward the wall, pegs with their own small order. He opens the high shutter a hand's width. Outside, the cloister walk holds footprints like notes on a staff. Somewhere the scriptorium coughs a small cough of parchment dust. The smithy taps an even tap, not sharp, not dull, just present. The mill, farther off, carries a rumor of turning. The whole house breathes at one pace. Bread joins breath. Broth joins breath. Bells join breath. The kitchen is a lung no one sees, filling and emptying without fuss. A gentle aside, some histories move by banners and drums, others turn on a ladle and a good knife. Brother Kitchener sits on the low stool for the first time in hours and laces his fingers over his knee. He is not tired, he is used. The helper leans a shoulder to the warm part of the wall and studies the fine crack in the plaster that looks like a tiny river. Both listen to what they made, bread crust cooling, a last oat cake ticking as it decides it is done, the kettle's throat clearing in case someone asks for tea. Neither speaks because nothing requires words. The bell rings, noon folds open. The house moves together like geese changing the shape of the sky. The kitchen releases them to it, content to be ready when the next page turns. Now these quiet kitchens and steady hands will keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening. Sleep well and sweet dreams.